Chapter 509. It was still early autumn, but there was a chill in the grand palace hall. Everyone in the palace felt threatened, especially when they saw that figure slowly appear at the end of the long corridor. Everyone hurriedly knelt down in fear and trepidation. "Greetings, Your Highness." In the great Imperial Palace, there was no need to kneel when greeting. But for some reason, after the Crown Prince's wedding, they had developed a heartfelt fear of the Crown Prince. Their daily greeting had unknowingly become a kneeling ceremony. Gong Che walked past without looking sideways, causing them to not even dare to breathe loudly. The golden dragon on the black robe represented supreme nobility. As it brushed past their eyes, the palace servants on the ground looked at the dragon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws and lowered their heads even more. However, the owner of the robe suddenly stopped, causing everyone's hearts to skip a beat. "The medicine in your hand is for Zhaoyang Hall?" A clear male voice sounded. It sounded like a smile, but it inexplicably made them feel cold, causing their words to tremble. "Your Highness, this medicine is for Zhaoyang Hall." When news of Gong Dai's actions in Yuqi spread, the emperor fell ill after being enraged. Gong Che smiled slightly. "Leave it to me. You may leave." "This doesn't make sense." The young eunuch raised his head and wanted to say something, but when he looked up, he saw the crown prince's gentle smile. Although he was smiling, his eyes were like cold stars, causing his heart to skip a beat. He immediately handed the box containing the medicine to the palace servant beside the crown prince, trembling in fear. "You may leave." Yes, everyone respectfully left, feeling uneasy. However, compared to eunuch Changshi's punishment, this crown prince was obviously more terrifying. Seeing that they had left, the crown prince stopped smiling and brought his men to Zhaoyang Hall. There was no one in Zhaoyang Hall. It was obvious that they had all been chased away by the emperor. Therefore, Gong Che didn't report and directly walked in. Before he entered, the sound of a porcelain bowl breaking could be heard, accompanied by the emperor's angry roar. "Take it away. I'm not eating it." Changshi said earnestly, "Your Majesty, the princess has always been reliable. Don't be angry. If there's anything, wait for her to come back, okay?" The emperor was silent for a moment. Gong Che smiled coldly and left the people beside him outside the door while he carried the bowl of medicine in. "Imperial father is still ill. It's not good to be so angry." Emperor was stunned, and he glared at Changshi. Changshi hurriedly slapped his own face and went out to welcome him. "Your Highness, His Majesty is not feeling well and does not wish to see anyone. Why don't you come and visit him another day?" Separated by a thick bead curtain, Gong Che naturally couldn't see the situation in the inner room. He only smiled and said, "That won't do. This monarch still has medicine in his hands. Moreover, this monarch is a son. It's only right for this monarch to visit father and show his filial piety. Furthermore, this monarch has received a piece of news that imperial father will definitely want to know." Changshi was a little embarrassed. At this time, he heard Gong Cheng's angry voice from the inner room. "Since that's the case, come in." Gong Che smiled and walked around Changshi. As they passed each other, he said, "Eunuch Changshi, just stay in front of the door. It's not good for such a big Zhaoyang Hall to not have a single gatekeeper." Changshi didn't hear the emperor's rebuttal. He knew that the emperor also wanted to be alone with the crown prince. So, he agreed and went outside. He was worried about the father and son. Gong Che held the bowl of medicine in one hand and lifted the bead curtain with the other. At that moment, the light on his body made it difficult for Emperor Cheng to look straight at him. Gong Che was 22 years old, which was the most youthful age for a man. When Gong Ju was Gong Ju's age, he was high-spirited and full of vigor. He felt that he could go anywhere. Now that he thought about it, the lofty aspirations and ambitions of the past seemed so distant. He was old, and his children were all grown up. Gong Che's hair was neatly combed into a bun, and he wore an exquisite purple and gold crown. He wore a black dragon robe with 5 dragons, and he gave off a dignified feeling. Even though he had a smile on his face, his aura wasn't weak at all. He didn't lose to his imperial father at all. During this period of time, he took the emperor's place in governing. He handled things calmly and in an orderly manner. Everyone in the court praised him. In this kind of training, he was even more majestic than before. People didn't dare to look straight at him. His jade-white fingers formed a sharp contrast with the bead curtain that was parted. It was as if the resplendent glass beads were not as eye-catching as his pair of white hands. When Gong Che saw Gong Chung, he smiled slightly and walked in. Imperial Father, it's time to drink the medicine. Emperor Chung was surprised and pointed to a short table. Put it there. Jin will drink it later. Gong Che narrowed his eyes. Imperial Father, it's better to drink the medicine while it's hot. Emperor Cheng's pair of tiger eyes stared at Gong Che. Jin said, put it there. His attitude wasn't good, but Gong Che didn't get angry. He directly put the medicine bowl on the short table and sat beside the emperor's bed. The emperor sat on the bed. He wasn't used to him being so close and slightly frowned. Gong Che said, Imperial Father, Immerse is coming back. Speaking of Gong Yimo, his tone was so affectionate that it made Emperor Cheng's frown even tighter, but Gong Che's smiling eyes suddenly froze. So, Gong Dai is coming back. Emperor Cheng suddenly had a headache. He covered his forehead with his hand and wailed. After a while, he said loudly, What Gong Dai? That's your younger brother. Younger brother? Gong Che sneered. I don't have such a younger brother. Gong Che. Emperor Cheng raised his head and glared at him, but Gong Che directly looked back and coldly looked at Emperor Cheng. This matter is also your fault. Imperial Father, tell me, why do you want to have so many children? Isn't it good that you only have Immerse and me? Emperor Cheng was speechless for a moment. After a while, he angrily roared, Bastard! Gong Che was scolded by the emperor, but it was as if he didn't hear it. He pointed to the medicine bowl on the side. Imperial Father, don't be angry. Drink the medicine. Your health is more important. You're clearly trying to anger me to death. Emperor Cheng's tiger eyes widened, looking a bit sinister. Are all the women in the world dead? Why are you two staring at Gong Yimo? Gong Che sneered. Then you should ask why Gong Dai is pestering Immerse. Immerse is his sister and mother. Slap. Emperor Cheng couldn't help but give Gong Che a slap. But after that, he regretted it. He looked at his hand, then saw that Gong Che's head was tilted by his slap. He sneered and glanced sideways at him. You only know how to force me. Gong Che touched his face and smiled very mockingly. If you're so capable, why don't you force Gong Dai to marry? It's only because I'm obedient. I've always been obedient, so you can force me without any pressure, right? Emperor Cheng's hand trembled. It's not like that. It's not. Gong Che's voice suddenly rose a bit. Gong Dai is a rebellious person, but you've always indulged him. He chased after Immerse to Yuchi, but you turned a blind eye. Isn't it because he's a prince and I am the crown prince? Chapter 5:10. If a prince marries a princess, he will be ridiculed by the world at most. But the crown prince can't, because he is the future monarch. He represents the dignity of the country and cannot be stained. Why? Gong Che closes his eyes and finally laughs mockingly. The crown prince is really a heavy burden. When I was young, I was worried about the gains and losses of this position. Everyone around me was cautious and conscientious. But if I don't become the crown prince, you can also turn a blind eye to me and let me pursue the woman I want. I'd rather not be the crown prince. Emperor Cheng's face darkens. Father! Gong Che suddenly shouts. He stares at him with burning eyes. You all think that the crown prince position is a glory and gave me this heavy burden when I was born. But have you ever asked me if I want it? Emperor Cheng is shocked by his shout. For a long time, he can't speak. Is being the crown prince not good? He looks at the child in front of him, the child he has placed all his hopes on. He has been so obedient since he was young, so outstanding, humble, polite, and not arrogant. When the empress made a mistake, he was so strict with the crown prince and even said that the crown prince position can be occupied by anyone. In his heart, it was actually a trial for him. Later, he did well and gave him a perfect answer. The late emperor said that the fourth generation must be a benevolent and conservative ruler. Gong Che is very good. He is gentle and benevolent, and is supported by the people. But where did it go wrong? Why did it cause such a thing? There is only silence between the two. After a long time, Gong Che seems to feel that he shouldn't reveal his emotions like this. Finally, he restrains his expression, gets up, and says condescendingly, "Father, Gong Dai is coming back. I think, as a father, you should at least treat everyone equally, right?" He reveals a gentle and cruel smile. "Since I can't get it, then Gong Dai shouldn't get it, right?" He has said so. If the emperor doesn't want to see his brothers kill each other for a woman, then give him a bit of fairness and stop Gong Dai from getting close to Immerse. As for the rest, he would do it himself. After Gong Che finished speaking, he left. When Changshi saw the crown prince leave, he hurriedly walked in. He saw the emperor staring at his hand in a daze. His face was filled with worry. "Changshi, this servant is here. He had always been here. He had always been the emperor's most loyal dog. Tell me, am I wrong?" Emperor Gong Cheng's eyes were in a trance, as if he had seen the distant past. Back then, imperial concubine Shui would rather die than abort the child. "I shouldn't have been soft-hearted. Later on, I shouldn't have brought her out of the cold palace. Last time, I should have let her drink that bowl of soup." Changshi listened quietly and did not say anything. Gong Chung continued, "Could this be the punishment for killing too many people when I was young? It happened to my son?" Changshi finally spoke. "Your Majesty is right, but I also have something to say." "Say it." Emperor Gong Chung glanced at him. "Only your words can make me believe them a little." Changshi said, "The princess is too outstanding. Her excellence has allowed Dayu state to prosper in recent years. She has contributed greatly to this prosperous era. At the same time, because she is too outstanding, men in the world can't help but be attracted to her. Isn't that right? Anyone who thinks they have the strength to fight for her is unwilling to let her go." Changshi sighed, "But we can't only accept the benefits of her excellence and hate the disadvantages of her excellence. Now, we are about to realize the four countries' commerce, the transnational banks, the north and south relay stations, the east and west national roads. Compared to these, her sin of disturbing people's hearts is not worth mentioning. It's only because your Majesty is involved that you feel uncomfortable. If outsiders know that you killed the princess in order to protect the crown prince, I'm afraid it will bring about unpredictable consequences." Yes, he had a premonition that the emperor wanted to kill again, but he didn't want to see such a situation. He only hoped that the emperor would listen to his words. The emperor was silent for a long time. After a while, he said, "You may leave." Changshi obeyed and left. He was worried about the princess, who was about to return. He hoped that these children would be fine. They were all good children and shouldn't end up in such a painful state. Si Wuyan sent Gong Yimo to the city gate. Meanwhile, Gong Dai and Shang Mingxi had a few last words of business. Gong Yimo said, "I promised Guanzai Jin that I wouldn't kill the Empress Dowager. I also promised that they would be together. You have to keep your promise." Si Wuyan was dissatisfied. "Why do I have to do what you promised?" Gong Yimo only smiled. "Because you are the emperor of Yuqi." Look, her skin was thicker than the city walls. Si Wuyan was speechless, but he still said, "I've already handed that crazy woman over to Gong Dai. She has been poisoned and is not in her right mind. Her motives are unknown. You have to be careful." Gong Yimo nodded. "Don't worry. I'm lucky. I won't die." At this moment, Gong Dai seemed to sense something and stopped talking with Shang Mingxi. He turned around, and Gong Yimo returned a smile. Gong Dai also couldn't help but smile. However, when his gaze fell on Si Wuyan, it turned cold. How long was this person going to talk to the royal sister? Shang Mingxi smiled good-naturedly. "Your Highness, please calm down. His Majesty doesn't have any bad intentions. He just wants to talk to the princess one last time. After all, after parting today, he doesn't know if he'll have the chance to see her again." Shang Mingxi sighed softly. Behind him was the city gates of Yuhua City, and in front of him was a wide road. After Gong Dai and the others left, it was indeed hard to say if they would see each other again. Thus, since ancient times, parting was the most difficult thing to bear. As Si Wuyan spoke, his voice suddenly lowered. He looked at Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo's bright and beautiful face was smiling at him, as if she didn't feel the pain of parting at all. That heartless look was really hateful. Don't you feel sad? Si Wuyin said exasperatedly. He clearly wanted to mock her, but the words that came out of his mouth sounded melancholy. Gong Yimo was stunned. She buried her head in thought. Could it be that after you saw me 4 years ago, when you returned to Yuchi, you still thought that we would meet again one day? Si Wuyin was stunned. At that time, he had listened to Gong Yimo's instructions and returned to Yuchi to prepare for a rebellion. He didn't even know if he was alive or dead, so why would he think that they would meet again one day? Isn't that right? Gong Yimo patted Si Wuyin's shoulder as she spoke in an old-fashioned manner. This world is so fickle and unpredictable. You think that some people will be able to accompany you for a long time, but with Akacha, they might die and leave you. You think that some people will never meet again in this lifetime, but maybe one day on a certain street, you'll meet them again. Life is full of surprises. If it's too sad to part, it's like parting forever. Wouldn't it be very awkward when you meet again? Chapter 511. When Si Wuyin heard her words, he couldn't help but laugh. She was always so wise. Even if she was comforting someone, she would say it as if it was the truth. He also felt that it made sense. Sometimes, I really envy Gong Dai. His voice was very soft and Gong Yimo almost didn't hear it clearly. Si Wuyin's gaze fell on Gong Dai, who was not far away. Gong Dai also looked over, and his heart became even more anxious. Why wasn't this Si Wuyin finished speaking? And why did he turn around to look at him? Si Wuyin saw that he was nervous and approached Gong Yimo with evil intentions. He used a very intimate position and whispered in her ear. I envy him for being able to have you. On the other side, Gong Dai really couldn't take it anymore and walked over with large strides. Si Wuyin sensed it, and before Gong Dai walked over, he quickly whispered in her ear. If there comes a day when you don't like him, come to my place and I'll welcome you with open arms. After saying this, before Gong Yimo could react, Si Wuyin was pulled away by Gong Dai. Your Majesty Yu Qi, please conduct yourself with dignity. You finished talking about the business with Minister Shang so quickly? Si Wuyin devilishly raised his eyebrows, but this one hasn't finished saying goodbye to the princess. The veins on Gong Dai's forehead throbbed. Even if you accompany a friend for 1,000 miles, you still have to part in the end. Your Majesty should go back. As he spoke, he turned around to pull Gong Yimo and prepared to lead her onto the horse. When Gong Yimo was pulled around and turned around, the blank look she gave him made Si Wuyin's heart suddenly hurt. She still didn't know that he liked her, and she was about to leave, so he subconsciously grabbed Gong Yimo's other hand. He still had a smile on his face. It was the kind of smile that wasn't sincere and had a bit of an evil aura. Princess, you still haven't told me. What made you decide to help me? He clearly didn't treat her well. He even threatened her and forced her to eat poison. Then, Gong Yimo rolled her eyes and took out a pill. Si Wuyin recognized it. It was the poison that he had forced Gong Yimo to eat. She actually didn't eat? Gong Yimo giggled. Because you're a fake tiger. The poison you gave me is also fake. He made such a big fuss, used Gong Dai to threaten her, and forced her to take the poison. But in the end, she went to check the poison and found that it was just an ordinary tonic. A person who possessed the art of poison but was unwilling to use poison to control others should be a good person. With that thought, Gong Yimo put the pill in her mouth. This time, she really ate it. It was as if she was eating candy. As she ate, she smiled. That crafty look instantly made Si Wuyin's heart feel bitter, hesitant, and amused. Gong Dai pulled Gong Yimo, and her hand was pulled away from Si Wuyin's. Si Wuyin looked at his empty hand, as if looking at his empty heart. He finally asked, his voice so soft that it couldn't be heard. Will there really be a certain day on a certain day on a certain street? Gong Dai didn't understand, but when Gong Yimo heard this, the smile on her face couldn't help but carry a bit of sadness. She said in a casual tone, who knows? There won't be any surprise if you know it first. Si Wuyin finally revealed a faint smile. You're right. There won't be any surprise if you know the result first. He took a deep breath, took a step back, and lowered his head. He didn't want Gong Yimo to see him in such a sorry state. In that case, I wish the princess a safe journey. Gong Yimo also stopped smiling and returned the salute with a serious expression. May Yuchi prosper, and may you live in peace. Farewell. With that, Gong Dai carried her onto the horse. Gong Yimo didn't see Si Wuyan lift his head until the horse turned around. This was good. Looking at him would make one feel melancholy. Shang Mingxi sighed and went to Si Wuyan's side. Only then did Si Wuyan straighten up and watch Gong Yimo and the others leave. Shang Mingxi saw that Si Wuyan's eyes were red. He also lamented, "What a good woman. Your Majesty, if I defect now and switch allegiance to the princess, do you think I'll have a chance to enjoy the moonlight first?" Si Wuyan couldn't help but glare at him. "You'll be hacked to death by Gong Dai's sword." Shang Mingxi suddenly clutched his chest as if he was hurt. Si Wuyan sneered and added another stab. "Don't worry. As long as you're still breathing, I'll save you. When the time comes, I'll send you to Dongwani as a servant. You can then live happily with Dongwani and Jean." With that, he turned around and returned to the palace. The guards all turned around, leaving Shang Mingxi crying and wailing behind. "Your Majesty, I'm just joking. I'm loyal to Your Majesty. The sun and moon can be my witness. Your Majesty, you can't burn the bridge after crossing it." The two parties left in two different directions. No one looked back. This was life. Everyone was born complete. No one would be unable to live after leaving someone. However, leaving someone would feel pain and sadness. This was also the lovable part of human nature. Even if the sadness would fade, the regret would become the deepest imprint in one's memory and be remembered forever. Gong Dai carried Gong Yimo and rode on the horse. Because she was injured all over, he didn't dare to let her ride alone. Gong Dai saw that Gong Yimo was a little sad after being separated. Her face was dispirited and his heart ached. Therefore, he quickly said something to divert her attention and told her about the situation in Dayu State. In the end, when Gong Yimo heard that the emperor was sick, Gong Dai actually hid it from her. She was so angry that she fiercely pinched Gong Dai a few times and ordered them to return to their country as soon as possible. Gong Dai was getting bolder and bolder. He dared to hide anything from her. However, no matter how fast they traveled, they still needed to rest. After meeting up with the previous 100 people, the 300 people majestically set up camp in the wilderness and didn't enter the city. When Bai Chio saw that Gong Yimo went back with Gong Dai and came back with injuries, his dissatisfaction towards Gong Dai reached its peak. He fetched water to wipe Gong Yimo's face, but was stopped halfway by Gong Dai. He said with a fake smile, "Your Highness, let me do this kind of rough work." No matter how he looked at Gong Dai, he didn't think that he was a person who knew how to serve others. Therefore, he deliberately said, "In any case, I have been serving the princess the entire way." Cough, cough. Gong Yimo, who was eating by the bonfire, heard this and coughed violently. This Bai Chio was definitely taking revenge. Didn't she just order him around? Did he have to harm her like this? Gong Dai slightly raised his eyebrows and looked at Bai Chio. "You are Bai Ji's son?" "I am Bai Chio." Bai Chio didn't give in at all. He didn't feel that he was lowly in front of Gong Dai. Bai Ji's training since he was young made him feel upright and plain-spoken. When he spoke, there was a kind of seriousness and rigidity. This kind of person also likes royal sister? Gong Dai's heart didn't waver at all. It would be strange if he didn't feel anything. Why does every man have to set their eyes on royal sister? Therefore, when Gong Dai swept a glance over, Gong Yimo was like a cat whose tail was burned by fire. She immediately jumped up. "What?" she asked dryly. "That gaze is so scary. Is he planning to rebel? Where are the 3 obedience and 4 virtues? Did he forget again?" Gong Yimo gradually lowered her head under Gong Dai's gaze. Gong Dai secretly sighed and turned to coldly say to Bai Chio, "This prince has been doing these things since young?" Chapter 5:12. As he spoke, Gong Dai took the basin from Bai Chio's hands. Bai Chio took care of Gong Yimo all the way, but Gong Dai was enslaved by Gong Yimo when he was very young. Not to mention washing up, it was common for her to grab him to scrub her back as a child. Bai Chio was stunned. The basin was taken away by Gong Dai, and his hands were empty. He was a little unconvinced when he saw Gong Dai pressing down on Gong Yimo to wash her face. His intimate attitude and movements were skillful, as if he had done it thousands of times. As Bai Chio watched, his heart sank a little, and finally only bitterness remained. For her sake, Gong Dai could disregard the dignity of a prince. He gently and meticulously wiped her face and took care of her washing up. Such a man, how could Bai Chio compare to him? Bai Chio stood there for a long time, but no one paid attention to him. Gong Yimo still wanted to eat, but Gong Dai felt that she had already eaten a lot. Moreover, she ate a lot of things that she shouldn't eat. So he pressed her down to brush her teeth. No, Gong Xiaojue, you want to turn the sky upside down. I want to eat marinated beef. Give it back to me. Gong Dai expressionlessly raised the plate in his hand. Then Lo Chi took the plate away under Gong Yimo's hateful eyes. His perennially serious face couldn't help but reveal a flattering smile. Princess, you are injured. The doctor said that you can't eat anything, but you have already eaten a lot. Gong Yimo showed a tearful expression. She sucked on her finger and said with grievance, "But it's delicious." Her small expression was as cute as it could be, and as pitiful as it could be. Lo Chi was defeated, but Gong Dai was still standing firm. No, brush your teeth. A matter of principle was not something that could be solved by acting coquettishly. Gong Xiaojue. Gong Yimo angrily glared at him. Soon, she was defeated again. She held her heart and helplessly said, "You are not cute. Where is my obedient little brother? Did you eat it?" Everyone who pretended to be busy with their work had sharp ears and eyes. They snickered when they heard this. Only the princess had the courage to call out, "Gong Xiaoju, Gong Xiaoju." They had to pretend that they didn't hear it. It was hard to hold back their laughter. Gong Dai was expressionless. When he heard his subordinates snickering, his face finally darkened. The royal sister was too noisy. In order to preserve his dignity in front of his subordinates, he held down Gong Yimo. Just when everyone thought that His Highness was going to make a big move, and His Highness was going to get angry and teach the princess a lesson, Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo's frightened little face, and his imposing manner instantly disappeared. Then, instead of beef, "Can I have some snacks?" Everyone nearly fainted. The husband's moral integrity was not shaken. This was definitely a case of the husband not following orders. Bai Chio couldn't stand it anymore. He hadn't fed the little monkey yet, so he turned around and went back to his tent. As a result, he was blocked by a woman. Li Xiu looked at the other side with a tangled expression. Why do you think they accepted it so calmly? It's obvious that the prince and the princess have such a relationship. Why don't those people dare to say it out loud? Why do they have to cater to the princess? How did he know? Bai Chio's hand that was holding the tent's curtain paused as he listened to the laughter coming from the other side. Blue veins appeared on his forehead. He stared at Li Xiu for a long time before saying, "I advise you not to look for trouble. You won't even know how you died." After that, he went back into the tent, leaving Li Xiu in the same place. She stomped her feet with some unwillingness. Embroidering a wedding dress for such a woman, she really felt uncomfortable. Gong Yimo was being fed by Gong Dai. The others didn't dare to laugh at His Highness and went back to their own business. At this time, Li Xiu inadvertently helped Little Seven boil the soup. Gong Yimo noticed that there was a woman beside Gong Dai. If Li Xiu knew that Gong Yimo had only just discovered her, she would certainly cry. Who is she? Gong Yimo stared at her for a long time before suddenly asking Gong Dai in a soft voice. Gong Dai wanted to give Gong Yimo a surprise about their marriage, so he said, "Don't worry about her." Gong Yimo stared at Li Xiu, making Li Xiu feel very awkward. She looked uneasy, as if Gong Yimo was very fierce. But in her heart, she thought that the princess must be jealous. She heard that His Highness had never had a woman by his side, so the princess must be jealous when she saw her. She might even make things difficult for her. Would His Highness help her? After all, she didn't do anything wrong. She doesn't seem to be from Dayu State. Are we bringing her back to Dayu State? Gong Dai nodded. Li Xiu's heart was even more excited. How could she not be angry when a woman suddenly appeared beside the person she liked? This was a good opportunity for His Highness to see how unreasonable she was. But Gong Yimo only made an "oh" sound and continued to eat the snacks, leaving Li Xiao standing there awkwardly. Gong Dai waved his hand to dismiss her. Gong Yimo didn't react, but she felt very strange. So many things were different in this life. Not only were there strange people who wanted to deal with her, there were also people who shouldn't have appeared. For example, this Li Xiao. She should be a master of Yuqi's top embroidery workshop. But now she was by Gong Dai's side. At this time, Gong Dai talked about the Shui clan again. He didn't say what the Shui clan said, only that they wanted to poison him, but he saw through them. Even now, those two people were still locked up by his subordinates. Gong Yimo helplessly sighed. They still didn't know how to deal with Imperial Father. Who would want to deal with the Shui clan that suddenly appeared? And Gong Dai said that they hated her because she didn't avenge the Shui clan. Gong Yimo just wanted to roll her eyes. What kind of logic was this? Since she couldn't figure it out, she didn't want to think about it. Anyway, the people were still in Gong Dai's hands. She would ask them personally when the time came. The group of people quickly rode and soon arrived at Dayu State. During this time, when they passed by the Longqing camp, Gong Yimo handed Bai Chiyo back to Bai Ji. Bai Ji looked at Gong Dai and then looked at his son. He didn't say anything and just told them about Lu Jin's miserable situation. He also said that he had reached an agreement with the new governor of Zhaoqing and would bring the troops back to Zhaoqing soon. Gong Yimo was very satisfied with the way he handled things. She didn't stay for long and soon left. What she didn't know was that after they left, Bai Chiyo had been watching from the hillside. He watched the woman leave without any reluctance and smiled bitterly in his heart. Well, right from the start, he had given her a bad impression that he was a persecutor and looked down on women. She probably didn't expect that he would like her, right? She left. That's good too. Those illusory fantasies should be shattered now. Every time the princess returned to the country, it wasn't peaceful. However, there was never a time when the atmosphere was so heavy. The entire capital was immersed in a tense and dangerous atmosphere. Even the commoners felt the pressure and didn't dare to show too much joy. Gong Yimo originally wanted to let Gong Dai go to Long City first. He directly handed the matter of repairing the road to Baisheng. Strictly speaking, it was considered a big crime. However, how could Gong Dai bear to let Gong Yimo face the emperor's anger alone? Therefore, no matter what, he followed along and went to see the emperor together with Gong Yimo. The atmosphere in Zhaoyang Palace Hall was gloomy. Gong Yimo looked at the exquisite cornices and arches. She suppressed the sigh in her heart and asked again, "Father really said that he won't see me?" Chapter 5:13. Eunuch Chang. She was also in a difficult position. Princess, don't be sad. His Majesty's illness relapsed this morning, and he's not feeling well. Princess, please come back another day. Gong Yimo's feet and shoulders were bandaged. Sitting in the sedan, she looked very pitiful. Chang, she couldn't bear to see her wait here. Gong Dai. Gong Dai looked at her and prepared to take her to Qi Manor first. Since they had already shed all pretenses, he didn't want to avoid anyone anymore. Gong Yimo said with some hesitation, "Can you go to Taiji Palace and get me a cloak?" Gong Dai knew that his royal sister wanted to send him away. Although he was unwilling, he still went. After he left, Gong Yimo jumped off the sedan and looked at her feet. She then looked at the 399 steps leading to Zhaoyang Palace and walked over. Changshi hurriedly stopped her. "Princess, His Majesty really doesn't want to see you. Why must you be angry with him?" Gong Yimo shook her head and interrupted him. "Imperial Father is angry with me. If I don't appear, he will only be angrier. Eunuch Changshi, don't stop me. I know what I'm doing." Saying this, she suddenly snatched the horsetail whisk from Changshi's hand and put it behind her waist. Then she knelt down on the first step and prostrated herself in the direction of Zhaoyang Palace. "Imperial Father, this son has returned." She used her internal energy to transmit her voice far enough for the emperor to hear. Changshi stomped his foot behind her. "Princess, you're still injured. Why must you do this?" He finally understood why the princess wanted to send His Highness away. If His Highness was here, he definitely couldn't bear for her to do such a thing with her injuries. Gong Yimo acted as if she didn't hear anything and prostrated herself again after taking 3 steps. "Imperial Father, This son has returned. Many of the palace servants around them were slightly moved. Regarding the matter between the princess, the prince, and the crown prince, they had heard some rumors. However, in this matter, the most innocent person was the princess. The poor princess was such a good person, yet His Majesty refused to see her. Gong Yimo's heart was calm. She sighed and continued to walk up the stairs. Fortunately, the white marble steps had been swept clean by the palace servants until they were spotless. Otherwise, her clothes would be dirty and Gong Dai would scold her again. Changshi saw that Gong Yimo did not listen to his advice, so he could only go to the emperor. The princess was still injured. Even if there was hatred between father and daughter, couldn't they sit down calmly and have a good chat? As for Gong Yimo, no matter what Changshi did, she still knelt every 3 steps and announced that she was back. The autumn sun hung high in the sky. Soon, beads of sweat appeared on her forehead, staining some of her hair. She looked a little embarrassed. However, because she had lost a lot of blood, she was now a little anemic. So when she stood up, her body swayed and she almost fell down the stairs. The palace servants around her cried out in alarm. However, in the next second, she fell into a warm embrace. Gong Yimo blinked. You didn't go. Gong Dai pursed his lips. He knew that the royal sister deliberately sent him away, but he still left. However, when he thought of the royal sister's personality, he was afraid that she would do something to hurt him again. So he quickly came back. As expected, the moment he came back, he saw her foolishly bowing every 3 steps, asking to see the emperor. It was undeniable that when he saw this scene, he was very angry. He wanted to carry the royal sister to find the emperor to clarify things. This matter had nothing to do with the royal sister. If there was any anger, just take it out on him. However, he hesitated. The reason why the royal sister sent him away was because she did not want him to interfere in this matter. She was strong and proud. She wanted to solve everything by herself. She had her own decisions and thoughts, so he had to respect her. Moreover, once she decided on something, no one could stop her, not even him. So, he suppressed his heartache and anger as he watched her kneel more than 10 times. Finally, when he saw that she almost fell, he could not help but go forward to catch her. He originally wanted to say something to her, but when he saw her pale little face, he could not say a word. He could only keep a straight face as the anger in his heart grew stronger. Gong Yimo even comforted him. I'm fine. She said it with a guilty conscience. Gong Dai stared coldly at her bleeding wound. Because of his anger, his voice was gloomy and trembling with anger. Even if you're using the trick of injuring yourself to gain sympathy, you shouldn't humiliate yourself like this. Gong Yimo blinked and said innocently, if I don't humiliate myself, how can it be considered a trick of injuring myself to gain sympathy? Still unrepentant? Gong Dai only felt that the volcano in his heart had erupted. He did not want to talk to Gong Yimo and prepared to go to the emperor directly. How terrible would that be? Gong Yimo hurriedly pulled him back. I know your heart aches for me, but you're still like this. Gong Dai suddenly turned around. His eyes were red as he looked at Gong Yimo and shrank back. His heart was swollen, and he felt a little wronged. Gong Dai could not help but lower his voice, but his gaze was still fierce, so much so that she could not raise her head. You're mine. Your whole person. Your body is mine. I won't allow you to humiliate yourself like this. He paused for a moment, trying hard to calm himself down, and said through gritted teeth, So, I'll settle this matter. Don't interfere. How could he settle this matter? Gong Yimo wailed in her heart. She had used the trick of injuring herself to gain sympathy because she was afraid that Gong Dai would make a move. She wanted to use the most gentle method to settle this peacefully. If Gong Dai were to make a move, it would be like a volcano colliding with an iceberg. Even if it was a solution, it would be an abyss of suffering. But this time, Gong Dai was determined to interfere in Gong Yimo's matter. He was her man, not her brother. Gong Yimo had no choice but to use her ultimate move. I just want to be able to receive blessings between us. Gong Yimo lowered her head, and Gong Dai was also shocked by her words. So, Royal sister was doing this for him? Gong Yimo whispered. There are many ways to solve this problem, but I hope that this matter between us can be settled peacefully. Do you understand? She raised her head and looked at him with a very sincere gaze. That gaze moved him, and even his anger dissipated like smoke into thin air. I'll accompany you. After a long time, he whispered. Gong Yimo waved her hand, but before she could say anything, Gong Dai helplessly grabbed her hand. I'll kneel with you. Can I not go in? If he didn't go in, it would be fine for her to settle this matter, right? But for him to watch her kneel alone, he couldn't do it. Gong Yimo nodded and continued to kneel every 3 steps. Gong Dai followed her and helped her up every time before she could get up. Gong Chung sat on the bed as if he was resting with his eyes closed. Changshi said that Gong Yimo was injured and that she was kneeling every 3 steps to seek an audience. Gong Chung didn't show it on his face, so no one knew what he was thinking. Not long ago, the child who could roll around and act coquettishly in front of him had to use such a method to meet him. Your Majesty. Hearing the voice getting closer and closer, Changshi couldn't help but ask, do you want to see her? At this moment, Gong Chung opened his eyes and heard Gong Yimo's voice. Imperial Father, I'm back? His eyebrows twitched, and finally, he seemed to be defeated. Tell her to get in here. Chapter 5:14. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo worriedly. Gong Yimo motioned for him to calm down and walked in herself. Zhaoyang Hall's unique ambergris fragrance hit her in the face. She took a deep breath and walked in. The moment the 2 people looked at each other, Gong Chung and Gong Yimo were silent. Gong Chung thought he would be angry, but the moment he saw her, he found that he couldn't get angry at all. Was it her fault that Immerse was excellent? What was wrong was that those people were not blind. They all saw the best and refused to give up. How could all of this be her fault? Gong Chung lamented and looked at Gong Yimo's shoulder that was slightly bleeding. He stopped her from kneeling. Since you're injured, why are you still running around? He said angrily. If it was before, he would only give people a feeling of being full of energy. But now, he couldn't hide his exhaustion. Gong Yimo looked at his face that had become thin and out of shape after not seeing him for a few months. Her nose turned sour, but she still bowed. Imperial Father, Immerse is back? Gong Chung watched her kneel and then climb up. No matter how hard his heart was, it softened. He sighed. Sit down. Gong Yimo sat down beside him. Before, there was such a big scene. The palace people who thought they were going to quarrel were relieved and quietly retreated. Outside, Gong Dai, who was waiting nervously, was a little impetuous. He was afraid that Imperial Father would embarrass Royal Sister. He was also afraid that Imperial Father would insist on not agreeing, and Royal Sister would be sad. But at this time, no one reported, but there was a smiling voice with inexplicable coldness. Isn't this my good brother? As soon as he heard Gong Che's voice, Gong Dai suddenly stood up straight. He didn't forget that this person was the biggest obstacle to him marrying Royal Sister. Gong Che's cold eyes fell on Gong Dai. He had a smile on his face, but he could no longer give people the feeling of a spring breeze. There was only coldness and danger. As he approached, he sized up Gong Dai and raised his eyebrows slightly. If I remember correctly, Imperial Brothers should be in Long City right now? He smiled, revealing his white teeth. Leaving your post without permission is a serious crime. Tell me, how should I punish you? Gong Dai naturally knew that the Crown Prince was temporarily in charge of court affairs. His expression was indifferent. Naturally, I'll let the Crown Prince deal with me. Although he said that, his aura was not weak at all. The 2 of them stood together. They were supposed to be the gathering of all the spiritual talents in the world. However, there seemed to be ice and fire between them. A moment of carelessness would cause them to collapse. Inside the palace, Gong Chung was lying on the bed with his eyes closed. His eye sockets were slightly sunken, and when he closed his eyes, he gave off a deep sense of fatigue. Immerse, why are you here? He asked hoarsely. Gong Yimo lowered her head. Imperial Father, I want to ask you for someone. Gong Dai? Gong Sheng looked at her with half-opened eyes. Gong Yimo lowered her head uneasily, and her hands could not help but grip her clothes tightly. Yes. Her answer was calm and without hesitation. Gong Chung sighed again. Every time he sighed, the anger on his face seemed to disappear along with it. His eyes looked outside the window, as if he was looking at another place. Immerse, when you were young, you were a very spirited child. He suddenly said, you have the decisiveness and insight that adults do not have. You see things in the future even more than Imperial Father. You are affectionate and righteous, and you are also carefree. At that time, I really envied you. You wandered outside the world, and you were born to be looked up to by the world. You would never be troubled or stay for anyone. Why is it that now you are confused? He smiled bitterly, but that smile made Gong Yimo's heart gradually sink. That's right, she was not as carefree as she was when she was young. The word love was hurtful. She originally thought that she would not love again, but she did not expect that she still fell for it. That's why she entered the world for love and was troubled by love. Imperial Father, all of this is my fault? Gong Yimo closed her eyes and suddenly thought of a solution. If Imperial Father agrees, this son is willing to live in seclusion overseas with Gong Dai and never return to the Central Plains. Gong Chung was stunned. Then he sneered, can you represent his will? Gong Yimo was very sure, I can. Gong Chung was silent. He looked at Gong Yimo's face, which was very similar to Shui Fei's, and suddenly smiled. Jin is also a man. When Jin loved imperial concubine Shui, Jin wished that Jin could give her the best of everything in the world. After she died, Jin thought that Jin would be depressed for the rest of Jin's life and live in fear. Gong Yimo did not interrupt him. She lowered her eyes and listened quietly. But Gong Chung smiled weakly. But a few years after she died, I gradually became indifferent. Other than her appearance and a few things that were deeply engraved in my memory, I could not think of anything else. A lot of the past has been forgotten. I still remember her, but at the same time, I will still favor the concubines, indulge in sensual pleasures, and deal with political affairs, he said in a low voice. Every word and sentence was sincere and heartfelt. Immerse, a man's feelings are not as indestructible as you think. When a man does not have you, he will naturally be obedient. But when he has you, his passion will quickly fade, and in the end, it will become the so-called family affection and responsibility. I remember Shuelian's life, perhaps not because of how deep my love was at that time, but because she suddenly left when our feelings were at the peak. I deeply regret it, but you, let Gong Dai put down everything for you. Are you not afraid that after the feelings fade and the passion fades, he will regret it one day? Gong Yimo wanted to say that she believed in him. After all, she even dared to entrust her life and body to him. Naturally, she would unswervingly trust him for such a small matter. But this sentence, she could not say it out loud. The shadow of her previous life had always shrouded Gong Yimo's heart. Feelings will fade and change, and it was not an exception. Gong Dai, will he really not regret it one day? What if she fell deeply in love, and the person she loved gradually felt that it was not worth it? Gong Chung continued, Immerse, you also know that this world is very big. Other than women, there are also money, power, status, and even women. There are many women with different charms. He can have 3 wives and 4 concubines, and enjoy the happiness of having multiple wives. These are all at his fingertips, but for you, will he give it all up? One day, if he feels that it is not worth it, he can still have 3 wives and 4 concubines, chasing after glory and splendor. But at that time, when you are old and weak, what will you do? But if he did not let go of everything, Gong Dai would not be able to have her, because Gong Che would not let it go. Gong Chung could see clearly that this mattered, unless one of the 3 of them died, or if one of his 2 sons gave up, there would be no reconciliation at all. Now that Gong Dai wanted Immerse, and Immerse was like him, unwilling to let the Dai Yu state fall into turmoil. Then, they could only live in seclusion with Gong Dai, and Gong Che would not be able to find them. Only then could they live in peace. So when Immerse said that she wanted to take Gong Dai away, he agreed, but he was also worried. Chapter 5:15. Therefore, what he said was purely from his father's point of view. Country and beauty, Gong Dai can have both, but for her, can he only choose one? As for Immerse, she's so outstanding. Is she really going to live in seclusion for a man and disappear into the crowd? Gong Yimo lowers her head, Imperial Father. To tell you the truth, emotionally, I'm also afraid that Gong Dai will have a change of heart one day. Even if Gong Dai's performance is perfect, her scarred heart will still be afraid. But I still choose to believe him this time. Gong Yimo looks at the Emperor with burning eyes. I believe he's different. Her hand clenches into a fist at the side of her body. I'll bet my whole life. Emperor Gong can't help but cover his face and mourn. Silly child. You should have glory and splendor, and set up an immortal achievement. You bet on a person. What if you lose? Gong Yimo sits there. Hearing this, she breathes a long sigh of relief. Between her vast brows, there's a kind of eternal peace. Her expression is calm. If I lose, it's just death. Even if you can't start over, so what? Once you choose, there's no way out. Once you die, it's not like you haven't died before. Emperor Gong has nothing to say. Gong Che can't wait to see Gong Yimo. Immerse has grown up and likes to run around, making them always spend less time together. But Gong Dai doesn't want Gong Che to see the royal sister. The royal sister wants to solve this matter peacefully and wants to get the emperor's blessing. The only possibility is for the royal sister to let go of everything and leave with him. From then on, she'll ignore political affairs and return to the wilderness. And all this, even if Imperial Father agrees, it must be hidden from the Crown Prince. Or perhaps the Crown Prince also agrees. Looking at Gong Che's somewhat expectant eyes, Gong Dai suddenly decides to give it a try for the sake of the royal sister and calmly communicate with him. Brother, are you willing to make a deal? Gong Dai swept his gaze around, and all the palace servants backed away. Even though Gong Dai had been gone for several months, even though he had been stripped of his position as commander of the imperial army, his deterrence was still there. Gong Che had originally come to wait for Gong Yimo. He had not seen her for too long. He wanted to see her again and talk to her to relieve the pain of lovesickness. Moreover, he and Gong Dai hated each other. He did not expect that Gong Dai would take the initiative to talk to him. A deal? Interesting. Gong Che's cold eyes stared at Gong Dai quietly. What deal? Gong Dai thought of something and suddenly smiled. The autumn sunlight shone on his black robe, reducing his sharpness and giving him a sense of warmth and calmness. If I give you Zhao Prison and the bank, are you willing to withdraw and let me and royal sister be together? He had thought about it. If the royal sister wanted to receive other people's blessings and did not want to make things difficult for others, then he was willing to help her achieve this small wish, even if he had to give up everything. But his words caused Gong Che to pause. After a long time, he came back to his senses and strangely laughed. That laughter grew louder and louder until it suddenly stopped. He raised his eyebrows and asked in surprise, "You say, you want to give your everything to us? You want us to give up on Immerse? Let you be together?" Gong Dai furrowed his brows slightly and pursed his lips without speaking. Let you be together. Gong Che lowered his eyes and chewed on this word. He laughed mockingly. Are you showing off as a victor? Without waiting for Gong Dai to reply, he stared at Gong Dai with burning eyes. His tone was fast and even a little excited as he said, "How about this? You will be the crown prince. In the future, you will be the emperor. Everything that us has can be given to you. How about you stop pestering Immerse? How about you return Immerse to us?" Gong Dai suddenly took a step back, his entire body emitting endless hostility. He must be crazy to want to settle things peacefully with Gong Che. Between them, it was clearly a situation where one side would not rest until one side was dead. Gong Che, you should understand that you are not my match. Agree to my conditions and settle things peacefully. There is no harm to you. His brows were tightly knitted. That biting cold froze the sunlight in front of Zhao Yanghal's door. Gong Che lowered his eyes and muttered to himself, "No harm? Haha." He turned to look inside Zhao Yanghal and finally revealed a gentle smile. When us was very young, us thought that what us wanted to do most was to benefit the people, to make the country prosperous and the people peaceful. That was what us had always done and firmly believed in. But one day, I realized that without her, there was no meaning in being the ruler of the world. The beautiful country could not compare to her smile. Gong Dai, you tell me that there is no harm. Gong Dai was silent. At this moment, Gong Yimo also walked out with a heavy heart. When she saw Gong Che, she did not know why, but she suddenly remembered the day of his wedding. He had lifted his crown in front of her, his black hair flying in the wind, and his wedding clothes red like blood. Gong Dai hurried over. How is Imperial Father? Gong Yimo shook her head in bewilderment. Imperial Father is asleep? He was originally talking to her and mysteriously fell asleep. She could not wake him up. Later on, she found that he was only sleeping. Gong Yimo had no choice but to come out first. Gong Che's eyes were like fire, making Gong Yimo unable to escape. After hesitating for a moment, she still walked forward and braced herself to say, Crown Prince Gidge, I am back. Gong Che suddenly smiled and I missed you so much. He said it as if there was no one else around. It was so straightforward that Gong Yimo was stunned. In the next second, she was pulled behind Gong Dai. Gong Dai stared coldly at Gong Che with narrowed eyes. Looks like Imperial Brother still does not understand the situation. He suddenly hugged Gong Yimo and fiercely kissed Gong Yimo in front of Zhao Yang Hall's entrance in front of everyone's eyes. Gong Che's eyes instantly widened. But in the next second, Gong Ju's attitude was tough. I made a deal with you to resolve this matter peacefully. Because this is Imperial Sister's wish, it does not mean that you have the right to take a mile after taking an inch. Gong Che's eyes gradually turned red. His gaze became more and more fierce, a bloodthirsty color, but he was still smiling. She is not yours yet. She is. Gong Dai tightly grasped Gong Yimo's hand. As if declaring his sovereignty, Imperial Sister, she is my woman. If you dare to snatch her away, I can only kill you. If Gong Che really did not know what was good for him and Imperial Sister's conciliatory policy was useless, then he would make a move. He did not mind making a scene until one of them was dead, who knew that Gong Che would smile lightly with narrowed eyes. Come at me, I am not afraid of death. As his voice fell, the two people's gazes collided. Unexpectedly, there was a burst of killing intent that made one's scalp numb. Gong Yimo gently bit her lower lip. She was very passive. She had never dealt with such a matter before and feelings were her weakness. In a moment, she suddenly felt lost. Seeing that Gong Dai was here, he could not be alone with Immerse. Therefore, Gong Che simply turned and left. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. She was tired from the long journey and after this torment, she was a little dispirited as she walked back to Taiji Hall. It was as if a mountain was pressing down on her body, making it difficult for her to breathe. Gong Dai walked silently beside her. He seemed to be a little angry. When he thought of Gong Che's unrelenting gaze, he wished he could declare his sovereignty to the world. But he had to take into account his sister's feelings, and he also had to care about what she cared about. He couldn't vent his frustrations on Gong Yimo, so he could only keep them in his heart and torture himself. Chapter 5:16. On the palace road, Gong Yimo suddenly sighed. Am I very useless? She felt that she had always been very straightforward. She had rejected all the things that she should have rejected. Why was she still in a dilemma? On one hand, she felt that she should reject Gong Che again. On the other hand, she felt that Gong Che seemed to have become twisted. If she did that, it would only have the opposite effect. And Gong Che had always been very good to her. She had no intention of hurting him. Then, was there no solution to this problem? Or was there only one way left? Seeing Gong Yimo's face full of self-blame, Gong Dai's heart softened and he said softly, No, I didn't do a good job. These things should have been done by him. Although he was concerned about the royal sister's feelings and didn't intervene for the time being, he still felt that he didn't do a good job. For example, what if he had assassinated the crown prince when he first discovered the signs? Unfortunately, he couldn't bear to see the royal sister sad. Otherwise, when the crown prince had no power and was in a precarious situation, It wouldn't have been difficult for him to assassinate him with his grandfather's power. Gong Yimo looked at him pitifully. In the end, she wanted to say something but stopped. Gong Dai looked at her and couldn't help but laugh. What's wrong? When he asked this, his tone was very gentle. He felt that he was a bit anxious. Actually, there was no need. The royal sister liked him. He believed that the royal sister wouldn't have a change of heart. There was no need to care about outsiders. With this thought, he looked at Gong Yimo even more gently. Gong Dai, let's leave. Gong Dai was slightly stunned. Gong Yimo continued. I don't want to be a princess anymore. You also don't want to be a prince. Are you willing to give up all your power and status and live in seclusion with me? She suddenly felt that this request was a bit too much. Give up all his glory and wealth and leave this place with her. It was very likely that he would have to live a life of hiding. And Gong Dai, she glanced at Gong Dai. Although he had lived a hard life when he was young, ever since he met her, he had gradually grown up. After he gained power, he had been living a good life. Ordinary noble clans would not even be able to lay their eyes on such things. In the Qi King residence, they were nothing out of the ordinary, let alone the things that he had brought from all over the world to give to her. He had spent more than 10 years of hard work and 6 years of hard work to obtain the power and wealth that would make others jealous. It was easy for her to say that she would give up, but now that she thought about it, she felt that she was a little shameless. Therefore, when she saw that Gong Dai seemed to be stunned and did not reply, she gave up and shook her head. Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. She felt even more depressed. But in the next second, Gong Dai pulled her hand and she fell into his embrace. Gong Dai was stunned. He felt that he and the royal sister were thinking the same thing again. Just now, he had been willing to use glory and wealth to make a deal with Gong Che, and she must have used this to persuade Imperial Father. Looking at the girl in his arms, her eyes were slightly widened. The disappointment in her eyes had not faded, as if she thought that he had not agreed. This silly girl. He lowered his head and accurately sucked on her lips and even took a bite out of it. How did she raise him to be so smart when he was so stupid? At this moment, Gong Yimo heard that a group of guards seemed to be heading in their direction and instantly panicked. Gong Dai carried her and in a flash, hid behind a large tree. Royal sister, what are you feeling wronged for? Gong Dai inexplicably wanted to tease her. His clear eyes were filled with smiles and doting, but Gong Yimo's eyes were lowered and her mouth was pouting, so she did not notice. Nothing. She just felt that she was too conceited. Gong Dai could not help but take a bite out of her face. She softly cried out and quickly covered her mouth with her little hand. So there was a group of guards patrolling this area. If they were discovered behind the tree, that would be too embarrassing. Gong Yimo glared at Gong Dai, but she saw him smiling. Smile. What's so funny? She used her eyes to signal him, but Gong Dai understood. I'm laughing at you. He hugged her tightly and then gently rubbed against her ear. Darling, why are you so cute? Darling, Gong Yimo's old face could not help but turn red. Gong Dai, this stinky brat's learning ability was really fast. He had learned and applied it so quickly. But why did she feel as sweet as honey when she heard those two simple words? Her little face was glowing white and her watery eyes blinked. In the end, she lowered her head in embarrassment and revealed a trace of blush. Gong Dai could not help but swallow his saliva. He pressed her against the tree and kissed her hard. Mph. His actions were too sudden and too forceful. Gong Yimo could not help but groan. Who's there? The patrolling guards heard the sound and immediately became alert. Could it be an assassin? Thus, they quietly approached the tree. They thought that they were stealthy, but in Gong Yimo's ears, it was like stepping on thunder. She could not help but push Gong Dai away. However, Gong Dai seemed to be doing it on purpose. Even though he clearly heard someone approaching, he continued to tease Gong Yimo's sensitive spots. He nibbled and kissed her neck and finally said in an extremely low voice, You call me too. When I'm satisfied, I'll let you go. Gong Yimo's face was so red that it was almost dripping blood. She couldn't imagine what would happen if someone saw her being intimate with Gong Ju behind a tree in broad daylight. She would lose all her face. Darling, She lowered her voice and quickly called out in his ear. Gong Dai was still calm and unruffled as he pressed down on her and kissed her, unmoved. Hearing that the footsteps were only about 2 to 3 meters away, they seemed to be afraid of disturbing the assassin behind the tree. They walked very slowly, each step cutting into Gong Yimo's nerves. Darling. Gong Yimo's words were almost close to Gong Dai's ear. That warm breath made Gong Dai feel numb. And when her lips rubbed against his earlobe, the soft touch made Gong Dai feel ticklish. His face quietly turned red, but he still stubbornly did not move away. He just wanted to see if he would get a surprise from Royal Sister at the last second. Gong Yimo racked her brains. Royal Sister, you have to hurry. Those people were already standing behind the tree. Gong Yimo was so embarrassed that she cried. Husband, she quickly called out, but it made Gong Dai's body feel like it had been electrocuted. It took a long time for him to regain his senses. Gong Yimo did not know that he was in a daze. She stuck close to him and called out again and again. Husband, husband, you. Her mouth was suddenly gagged. Gong Yimo's eyes were wide open and she was about to cry. Can you stop kissing at this time? But in the next second, Gong Dai suddenly pulled away and stood out. All they heard was the sound of more than 10 people unsheathing their swords. Your Highness? The leader of the guards almost did not recognize him. The man in front of him with clear eyes, rosy cheeks, and a sweet aura was really the unapproachable Prince Qi of Daiyu State? After looking at him a few times, they could not be sure. Even Gong Dai regained his senses. He looked at the group of people in front of him, and his eyes suddenly turned cold. Scram for this prince. Yes, this was the right style. Everyone was in tears. Chapter 5:17. Gong Dai's unique and different gaze swept over them. They answered very loudly and neatly, and then quickly left. They didn't even dare to ask what the prince was doing there. After a long time, Gong Yimo came out. She fiercely glared at Gong Dai and was so angry that she wanted to bite him. Gong Dai, I think we should set 3 rules, she said seriously. Huh? Gong Dai's eyes stared straight at her lips and then glanced at her injured shoulder. Finally, he regretfully withdrew his gaze and subconsciously said, Huh? His regretful eyes clearly harbored evil intentions. Gong Yimo was so scared that she hugged herself and said righteously, First, you can't kiss me in the palace. Gong Ju blinked his eyes and unexpectedly agreed. Very good. Gong Yimo felt a little more courageous. She said that if she wanted to be his wife, how could Gong Ju dare to disobey? Second, you have to listen to me in the palace. Unexpectedly, Gong Dai hesitated for a little while, and then agreed. His coldness revealed a kind of cleverness, but he was also very handsome. Gong Yimo was almost fascinated by him. It's not scientific. Gong Dai is so obedient. Third, she frowned and thought for a moment. Third, I want you to come with me. Gong Dai blinked, as if he didn't understand. Gong Yimo lowered her head, and her face turned red. Her attitude was tough and bad. Since you said you like me, you took advantage of me so much, you must be with me. Glory, wealth, power, and status, you must choose me. As she spoke, she boldly poked Gong Dai's chest with her white and tender fingers. You dared to hesitate just now? I don't care. You provoked me, so you must pay the price. I just want you to come with me. Anyway, I have already decided on you. You're my man for the rest of your life, and you can only have me as your woman. Seeing that Gong Dai still did not answer, she flew into a rage out of humiliation. Gong Dai, if you don't agree, I'll punish you according to the family rules. But in the next second, she actually soared into the air. Gong Dai carried her and used his qinggong to fly to a certain place. Gong Yimo was so scared that she patted his shoulder. What are you doing? Are you trying to rebel? She looked at Gong Dai's side profile and saw that he was also looking at her. Under the sunlight, his ink-black hair fluttered in the wind. When he glanced at her from the side, his jade-black eyes seemed to glow. It was a soul-stirring beauty. He pursed his lips and smiled. His feminine action made Gong Yimo forget to breathe. This is a foul. Foul. Soon, she knew where she was. In this palace, there was one place that was their secret territory, and that was the cold palace. Gong Yimo's cheeks turned red. She still remembered that stone table. Last time, she was almost eaten by Gong Dai here. Wait, if she came here again, she wouldn't lose her chastity, right? Her injuries had not healed yet. So she swallowed her saliva and stuttered. Aren't we talking about serious matters? Why are you here? She saw that Gong Dai had unbuckled his belt. Wait, let's talk nicely. Who taught you to take off your clothes without saying a word? Gong Yimo's eyes widened. Gong Dai smiled again. Gong Yimo suddenly felt that Gong Dai was a very scheming person. He usually did not smile, but during crucial moments, he kept smiling to confuse her. Most importantly, she really did not live up to his expectations. She had seen this face for so many years, but she still could not resist it. At this moment, he smiled faintly. Coupled with the flirtatious atmosphere of undressing, it made her blush and her heartbeat quicken. Even her breathing became erratic. Gong Dai's eyes were filled with a doting smile. I had no choice. Royal sister did not even give me a chance to speak. I could only do it for you to see. Gong Yimo's legs turned to jelly from his smile. She sat down on the stone table. Show me what? Gong Dai approached her step by step. Without seeing him move, his outer clothes fell to the ground, revealing his snow-white inner clothes. Show you. He lifted Gong Yimo's chin with one finger and lowered his eyelids. His long eyelashes fluttered lightly, making Gong Yimo's heart almost jump out of her chest. Show you. My determination to be your man. Gong Yimo did not understand what he meant for a long time. Gong Dai had already surrounded her. One of his hands supported her body, forcing her to lean back again. Gong Dai's other hand. No. The other hand's fingers seemed to have magical powers. It moved up from her chin and traced her lips. His fingertips were not hot, but it made her feel as if she was scalded. Every place he touched, she trembled and wanted to retreat. You said, you want me to put everything down and leave with you? Gong Yimo's originally scattered consciousness suddenly gathered. She held her breath and listened to him, but he maliciously stuffed his finger into her mouth. He used his finger to hook her tongue. Even though it was not a naked scene, it made her blush and her heart beat faster. She did not know whether to suck or swallow his finger. She wanted to push his finger away with the tip of her tongue, but he used his finger to entangle with hers. It was like a kiss. Her eyes became blurred and watery. She looked as if she was about to cry. Gong Ju's delicate appearance caused his Adam's apple to roll. However, considering her injuries, he held back. Instead, he spoke in a frivolous tone, as if he came from the end of the world. Do you know? He asked softly. Gong Yimo sucked on his finger and groaned in a daze as an answer. That kitten-like voice almost made Gong Dai break down. His eyes became darker. Finally, he pulled his finger out slowly and replaced it with his lips. His whole body pressed forward, directly pressing her onto the stone table. Once I think about putting everything down and leaving with you, I can't wait. His affectionate gaze was so fiery that it almost set Gong Yimo on fire. You will never understand how long I have waited for this moment. I want to be with you, just the two of us. I want to be with you so much that my heart hurts. Gong Yimo's heart instantly fell to the ground and was filled with sweetness. She hugged Gong Dai's neck and groaned as she spoke. Why don't you do it? I think my injury won't be a problem. Such a bold and naked temptation made Gong Dai's hand that was hugging her suddenly tighten. But seeing her wound constantly bleeding, his heart was in turmoil. Finally, he made up his mind. Once her injury healed, they would get married. Then they would leave and never come back. Gong Yimo also felt the pain from her wound, so she did it on purpose. She felt that Gong Dai was feeling uncomfortable from holding it in, but she wanted Gong Dai to hug her to sleep. Gong Dai had no choice but to passionately carry his beloved woman to the bed and then fall asleep in each other's arms. His heart was silently planning the things he needed for the wedding. His eyes flashed with ambition, He wanted to hold a grand wedding for her. It was only once in a lifetime, so how could it not be grand? Chapter 5:18. As for Gong Yimo, she fell asleep as soon as she touched the bed. In Gong Dai's arms, she felt especially at ease. Her injuries didn't hurt anymore. She just wanted to hug him and sleep until the end of time. While she was in a daze, she felt Gong Ju changing her bandages. In a daze, she suddenly grabbed Gong Dai's hand and interlocked their fingers. "Do you love me?" Love? Gong Dai was fascinated by this new question. He realized that loving the people like his children was such a sweet word. In an instant, he self-taught himself and said affirmatively in her ear, "I love you." But Gong Yimo fell asleep again and didn't hear it at all. Gong Dai didn't know whether to laugh or cry. On one side, it was sweet as candy, but on the other side, it was a storm. The Empress directly barged into the Eastern Palace. At that time, Gong Che was in the study, drawing a woman that he missed dearly. Every time he thought of her, he would calm down and draw her appearance. But when he thought of how she was in the palace now and he couldn't see her, the anger in his heart surged. Coincidentally, the Empress barged in without permission. With a move of his brush, a good painting was ruined. Gong Che didn't have any palace servants by his side, and the Empress didn't bring any attendants. There were only the two of them in the large study. Gong Che frowned slightly. In the next second, the Empress walked over. When she saw who he was drawing, she instantly tore it to pieces. Gong Yimo, Gong Yimo. Could it be that Gong Yimo is the only woman left in this world? The Empress completely disregarded her bearing. As the paper flew, she asked with red eyes, "Gong Dai is seeking his own death. He wants to ruin himself for a woman. Do you also want to ruin yourself?" Gong Che was a little displeased. Imperial Mother is so angry. I wonder why? Why? You still have the face to ask why. The Empress' chest heaved up and down violently. If I hadn't seen Miaolon crying her heart out, I wouldn't have known how many months she has been married to you. Or, she is still a virgin. Originally, it was hard for her to say these words. But now that she was angry, she didn't care about anything else. Could it be that you're still keeping your chastity for Gong Yimo? She was fooling around with Gong Dai and Yuchi. When she returned today, everyone saw that there was something going on between them. She had long been Gong Dai's woman. Why are you still so stubborn? Mother. The Empress' words provoked Gong Che. He raised his voice, and that terrifying murderous aura scared the Empress into silence. She looked at the tall son in front of her and raised her hand to give him a slap. Yet, he hated himself and couldn't do it. It's all Imperial Mother's fault. It's all my fault. She suddenly covered her face and wept. Imperial Mother shouldn't have begged her to help you. I shouldn't have handed you over to her. At that time, Imperial Mother found out that you had feelings for her, but because she could help you, I let it go and didn't stop you. I thought that when you grew up, you would naturally give up this incestuous feeling. Who knew that you would become more and more intense, and now it's out of control. She wailed, "It's all my fault." Gong Che was silent for a while. Finally, he used a handkerchief to wipe the tears on her face. Imperial Mother, did you forget that you are the Empress? How can you cry like this and make people laugh at you? Gong Che's gentleness made the Empress cry even louder. She had such a good son, the child she was proud of, but he fell in love with someone he shouldn't have. But was this Gong Yimo's fault? Even if the Empress was biased, she couldn't say such things. At that time, the situation was critical. No one was willing to stand up to save the Liu family, only Gong Yimo. And Che's position as the crown prince was suppressed again and again. She was almost forced to commit suicide. It was also Gong Yimo who drew a broad path for Che and gave him the supreme honor now. No wonder Che liked her for so many years. Even now, her heart obviously belonged to someone, and she refused to give up. If only Imperial Son knew that Gong Yimo wasn't his biological sister. He and Gong Yimo were together day and night when they were building the canal. If he knew that she wasn't his biological sister, Gong Dai wouldn't have anything to do with him. The Empress was shocked by this sudden thought. In the end, she almost forgot that she came to find Gong Che for Su Miaolan's matter. Now, Su Miaolan was still waiting for her to comfort her. Since she couldn't do anything about Imperial Sun, she could only comfort her first. Seeing the Empress leave after making a fuss, Gong Che shook his head good-naturedly. He was gentle by nature and wouldn't get angry over this kind of thing. But Su Miaolan, the Empress, was still a little uneasy when she returned to Fengqi Palace. She didn't go to see Su Miaolan, who was waiting for her. Instead, she went to her bedroom and drove everyone away. Then, she talked to her confidant. Shui Xian had been with her for the longest time. She immediately knew that something was wrong and couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, what's wrong?" The Empress wanted to say something but stopped. Her willowy eyebrows were tightly knitted. Finally, she said slowly, "Tell me, now that Gong Yimo and Gong Dai are together, why is Imperial Sun still unwilling to give up?" Gong Yimo hadn't come to Fengqi Palace yet, but Shui Xian went to take a look in the morning and said slowly, "In my opinion, Princess, I'm afraid she's still a virgin." The Empress was shocked. She looked at Shui Xian with her big phoenix eyes. Shui Xian had been in the palace for a long time and had been by her side for a long time. In the past, she was basically in charge of the selection. If she said that Gong Yimo was still a virgin, she must be right. Now, her mind was active again. After a while, she made up her mind and said hesitantly, "Actually, Gong Yimo isn't His Majesty's child." "What?" Water deity immediately covered her mouth. The Empress glared at her. Why was she being so loud? Unless the Emperor revealed it himself, it would be a big crime no matter who leaked it. But she couldn't care so much now. When Imperial concubine Xue entered the palace, she was pregnant. And it wasn't His Majesty's child, but the child of her deceased husband in Xue country. His Majesty wanted to get rid of this shame, but Imperial concubine Xue would rather die than comply. His Majesty finally compromised and recognized this child, which is Gong Yimo. The Empress had calmed down when she said this. She had accepted the things that she couldn't accept in the past as she grew older. Shui Xian calmed down after a while. Plus, she knew the Empress well. A bold idea rose in her mind, and she said hesitantly, So your Highness, you want to?" The Empress nodded her head and then sighed. "I suppressed him so much, but my son didn't give up on his feelings for Gong Yimo. So I thought, why don't I think of a way to announce Gong Yimo's identity to the world? This way, although there are some obstacles when my son marries her, it won't be too big. The main thing is that His Majesty won't be easy to get through. This is really a headache." But what she didn't expect was that at this moment, Gong Che stood in front of her door and was stunned for a long time. He was like a statue. He originally wanted to come to the Empress's place and bring Su Miaolan back to teach her a lesson. But when he saw the Empress chasing everyone out, he felt strange. He didn't allow anyone to announce his arrival and walked in himself. He didn't expect to hear such words, "Emo," or "wasn't his sister." He and she could have been together from the beginning. Chapter 519. A wave of bitterness surged up, and Gong Che didn't even have the strength to push open the door and question her. He couldn't help but think back to the time when he was worried that she was his younger sister. He was panic-stricken and had to endure. He even wanted to give up. Later, he really couldn't give up and chose to silently protect her and love her. He thought that as long as he endured until he became the emperor, he would be able to embrace her without caring about the rules of the world. But a few months ago, he suddenly couldn't endure it anymore and wanted to take her by force. But at this time, someone told him that she wasn't his younger sister and that he didn't have to endure it from the beginning. The bitterness gradually turned bitter. Gong Che didn't know whether to cry or laugh. If only he had known earlier. When they were building the canal, they had been together day and night. It was such a good opportunity. He could have taken her. In other words, when he was 16 or 17 years old, he actually had the opportunity to have her. At that time, Gong Dai was in Shizhou. He clearly had so many opportunities. So many opportunities. His heart felt like it was burning and flooding. Gong Che finally covered his chest and slowly knelt down on one knee. That kind of pain was suffocating. It was as if his illness had acted up again. No, it was more painful than his illness. More painful. It had been a long time since he dared to recall the past. Because as long as he thought about how she had spun around him vividly, how they had been together day and night, how sweet and torturous those days were, he would feel flustered. He was afraid that those were the only times he could have her in his life. So he didn't dare to recall. The more he recalled, the more painful it was. It could almost drive him crazy. But now, the past was repeating itself. The 17-year-old him and the 13-year-old her suddenly became 16 years old. The scenes kept changing. One time, it was when they were eating with the workers and she secretly gave him the innards that she didn't like. The next time, it was when he was at his most frustrated and she hugged him and said, "Cry. No one can see you in my arms." This girl belonged to him. Gong Che's brows were tightly knitted together. He clutched the hand over his heart and dug his fingers deep into it. He wanted to leave this place. He wanted to take back his girl. The next day, the imperial court was full of reprimands. Gong Dai did not attend the imperial court. Since he had already made the decision to retire, he did not want to care about the affairs of the imperial court. He had more important things to do, and that was to prepare a grand wedding for his royal sister. After the wedding, he would abandon everything in the capital. He did not want anything that was within his reach. Therefore, he did not care about the impeachment memorials that fell like snowflakes. It was no longer important whether those people knew the truth or not. If they did not choose to live in seclusion, then there was still a need to explain. But now, Gong Yimo felt that since they were going to leave, then so be it. There was no need to expose this matter and embarrass the emperor and the imperial family. Although the commoners were very surprised by this matter, however, they loved and respected Gong Yimo from the bottom of their hearts and feared Gong Dai from the bottom of their hearts. Therefore, their reactions were not as strong as those of the court officials. Gong Yimo did not pay attention to the outside world and focused on recuperating. From time to time, she would torture the emperor. In fact, the emperor had already relented and was willing to let them leave. However, he did not agree with Gong Yimo's decision at all. He had not given her a good look for several days. On this day, the emperor suddenly had a headache. Gong Yimo was worried that his old illness had relapsed and quickly called for the imperial physician. After the imperial physician looked at him, he was helpless and could only take medicine to recuperate. Gong Yimo had no choice but to ask Gong Dai to go outside the city and call for the medicine king, Li Xian, to see if he had any ideas. This time, the illness was not serious. Emperor Gong was still conscious. Seeing Gong Yimo's worried face, his heart softened and he could not help but remind her. "Emoer, since you want to leave, then leave." Gong Yimo's eyes lit up. But thinking that the emperor was still sick, she shook her head. "No hurry, I will leave after I get better." Unexpectedly, Emperor Gong sighed. "Zhan's illness will not be cured. Moreover, that child Che seems to have been stimulated recently. He has not come to see you even once, right? But he has gathered a lot of troops. Zhan, I don't know what he wants to do." Gong Yimo was a bit embarrassed. She also avoided meeting with Gong Che. What happened in the court, Gong Dai did not tell her. Instead, the sick emperor was more worried about all this and told her, "I know about this matter, Father Emperor." She wanted to say that she was going to look for the Snow Clan's treasure, but Emperor Gong seemed to be aware of her thoughts and firmly shook his head. "That treasure place, everyone can go. Only you can't go." But Gong Yimo was a bit wronged. Seeing the emperor's increasingly thin appearance, how could she bear to take Gong Dai away? At this time, the emperor suddenly fell asleep. It seems that his body is more serious than what he showed. Gong Yimo secretly made up her mind. She must find the Snow Ganoderma. It can be considered she and Emperor Gong's father-daughter relationship in this life. In fact, Emperor Gong is very good to her. In a feudal society, he has used all his strength to raise her to the highest position. It's her own fault. She wants to live in seclusion. Thinking about this, she felt that Gong Dai is too slow. He went outside the city to invite the Medicine King. Why hasn't he come back yet? The sandalwood in the incense burner burned little by little. Gong Yimo suddenly yawned. She felt that her body was soft and wanted to get up and walk. Just as she walked outside, she was blocked by a person. Gong Che. Gong Yimo immediately woke up. During this time, Gong Che did not come to see her. She felt lucky that she didn't have to deal with this complicated feelings. But now he appeared without warning. Gong Yimo's heart thumped. She bowed in a low voice. "Brother Crown Prince." There was no response. She looked up and felt that the Crown Prince's eyes were red. That kind of red, hiding a deep passion. Brother Crown Prince?" Gong Che suddenly smiled. He wore a bright yellow court robe, and his smile was as warm as the rising sun. His handsomeness was indescribable, but Gong Yimo felt a sense of danger. Like a poppy, he looked beautiful, but his beauty was strange and frightening. Immerse, he called her name with 3 parts affection and 7 parts deep love. "I miss you so much." His voice was so gentle that it made Gong Yimo's scalp tingle. She pursed her lips and pretended that she didn't hear it. "Brother Crown Prince is here to see Imperial Father. I still have things to do. I'll leave first." Seeing that Gong Che only smiled and didn't respond, she sighed in relief and moved towards the door. She took a small step and looked up. Seeing that Gong Che didn't move, she sighed in relief and took another small step. Just like that, she slowly moved away from Gong Che's side. Then, she prepared to run out as fast as she could. But at this moment, her hand was grabbed by Gong Che. Gong Yimo opened her eyes wide and turned around. She saw Gong Che looking at her with a sad face. "Immerse, do you not want to see me that much? Once you see me, you want to run?" Chapter 520. No, not at all. Her heart ached. It was better to leave quickly. If Gong Dai came back and saw them, she would not be able to hold him back. Gong Che smiled faintly. "Since that's the case, why don't we sit on the couch and talk?" The outer room was connected to the inner room. At this moment, the emperor was sleeping on the dragon bed in the inner room. Gong Yimo felt that Gong Che would not do anything rash, so after thinking for a while, she sat down. She still had a trace of hope in her heart, hoping that she could persuade Gong Che. She really did not want things to get out of hand. Seeing that Gong Yimo was obedient, the invisible hostility on Gong Che's body disappeared. He sat beside Gong Yimo and looked deeply at her. It was this little girl who made him yearn for her. Sweet and sour, but it did not matter. She would be his very soon. Gong Yimo felt her scalp tingling under Gong Che's stare. She could not help but put on a serious face and said seriously, "Crown Prince Gidge." His slightly raised voice was like a small brush, gently touching people's hearts. Gong Yimo did not realize that this feeling was inappropriate and continued to say, "I don't want to hide it from you. Gong Dai and I are already in love with each other." Gong Yimo's words caused Gong Che's face to twist for a moment. Then he smiled again. So? Gong Yimo frowned. "You like me? I'm very happy and very grateful. But, since my heart already belongs to someone, why don't Crown Prince Gidge give me your blessings?" She tried to persuade him again and again because she had already let go of the hatred in her previous life. In this life, Gong Che did not do anything to hurt her. In fact, he had always been very good to her, so she did not want to hurt him too much. "Give you my blessings?" Gong Che suddenly sat closer and tilted his head to ask, "If we are together, do you think Gong Dai will give us his blessings?" Crown Prince Gidge. "Sure." He suddenly pressed his finger against Gong Yimo's lips and said softly, "I'm not your brother. Immerse, I'm your man." Gong Yimo was a little angry. She turned her face away and avoided his hand. She nervously looked inside the room. Seeing that the emperor was not moving, she said, "Brother Crown Prince, calm down. If you continue to be like this, I have nothing to say to you." "Calm down." Gong Che smiled coldly. He stood up and walked in front of Gong Yimo, looking down at her from above. "How can I calm down?" He lowered his eyes and looked at Gong Yimo, who was sitting on the couch. He frowned and curled his lips slightly. "How did Gong Dai kiss you? Between the two of you, you've already done everything." Gong Yimo blushed. The emperor was still sleeping inside. Could Gong Che restrain himself a little? Gong Yimo glared at him fiercely. I'm leaving now, brother Crown Prince. Please help yourself. But Gong Che held her down. Gong Yimo did not want to stay any longer, so she wanted to use force to subdue him. But at this moment, she was horrified to discover that her internal energy had disappeared. Her inner strength had disappeared, and she felt weak all over. She actually only realized it now. Gong Che smiled faintly. Does Ruan Jinxiang smell good? Men are fine when they smell it. At most they'll feel sleepy. But when women smell it, they'll feel weak all over and temporarily lose their martial arts. Gong Yimo felt that things were getting serious. She looked coldly at Gong Che. You'd better let go of me, Gong Che. You know the consequences of angering me. Gong Che's eyes flashed as he stared fervently at her lips. I really like hearing you call my name, using this little mouth to call my name. He narrowed his eyes and added in a low and hoarse voice, It makes me feel numb all over, as if I've been poisoned by Ruan Jinxiang. Gong Yimo saw him approaching and her body involuntarily leaned back, feeling a little nervous. Brother Crown Prince, you like me. Perhaps it's because I'm good to you, the first woman of the right age to be good to you. After a long time, it's become an obsession. If you're willing to let go of this obsession and look at others, you'll realize that all women are the same, but they all have their own characteristics. There's bound to be someone you like. Gong Che suddenly loosened his belt. That unruffled action had a bewitching feel to it. But what should I do? No matter how many women I find, I can't piece together one of you. Gong Yimo secretly circulated her energy and realized that she really could not get lucky. It was a pity that she was afraid of being poisoned in Yuchi. Every time she entered a dangerous place, she would subconsciously hold her breath. She did not expect that she would not be poisoned in Yuchi, but instead fall into a trap when she returned. What do you want to do? Seeing Gong Che take off his clothes, Gong Yimo was really scared. Gong Che's white fingers slowly took off his outer clothes. He completely did not care that this was Zhaoyang Hall, that Gong Dai and Chang Shi could return at any time, and that the emperor could wake up. He calmly approached Gong Yimo and finally knelt on one knee on the couch, pressing between Gong Yimo's legs and asking her from above. What do you like about Gong Dai? His eyes seemed to be puzzled. Appearance? He touched his own face. Am I ugly? Seeing his burning gaze, Gong Yimo was afraid that he would act recklessly and wanted to stall for time. After thinking about it, she shook her head. Gong Che was good-looking and gentle like jade. He had a natural temperament that made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. It was undeniable that this kind of man was the most charming. Otherwise, she would not have been so unhesitant in her previous life. Seeing Gong Yimo shake her head, Gong Che was a little happy. Then what is it? My personality is not good? Or do you prefer someone colder like Gong Dai? Under his gaze, Gong Yimo thought about it and shook her head. She liked people who were gentle. Gong Dai's personality was cold, but he was very gentle to her. Thinking of Gong Dai, Gong Yimo looked at the person in front of her, the person she once loved deeply, and said softly, You're very good. Yes, he was 1,000 times more outstanding than in her previous life. But I already have Gong Dai. In this life, it would not change. The smile on Gong Che's face suddenly disappeared. He grabbed Gong Yimo's chin and kissed her deeply on the lips. With a destructive madness, Gong Yimo's eyes widened, and she quickly struggled. But the more she struggled, the harder Gong Che kissed her. It was as if he wanted to eat her up. It was as if they would be separated by life and death in the next second. The emperor was still inside. If he were to see this scene, he would definitely be angered to death. However, her hands were soft. Gong Che was very strong. After he pressed Gong Yimo down and kissed her, he questioned her with red eyes. How am I not comparable to Gong Dai? Power, status, appearance, personality. They were clearly a match. He was calm and gentle, while Gong Yimo was lively and lively. He had a feeling that they were a match made in heaven. Gong Yimo was pressed down by him until she could not breathe. She was also angry. If you don't let go of me, I will ignore you for the rest of my life. Gong Che sneered. If you want to ignore me, then ignore me. He got up and started to take off his inner clothes. His exquisite collarbone was slowly revealed. His face was like jade, and his eyes were slightly red. He had a kind of tyrannical beauty. Anyway, after today, you will be my woman. Chapter 521. He didn't mind. He didn't mind that Gong Dai had her first. After all, he was the one who missed her first, so he couldn't blame anyone else. Gong Yimo suddenly understood something. What did you do to Gong Dai? Gong Che suppressed his maniacal laughter. Nothing much. I just delayed him. When he comes back, he might be able to see us having sex. What do you think of this? The ninth prince suddenly went crazy and killed the emperor. In order to protect the emperor, the crown prince shot the ninth prince to death. What do you think? Gong Yimo's heart turned cold. Gong Che, you're really crazy. Yes, I've been crazy for a long time. Gong Che looked at her greedily. He looked at her little face that was flushed red from anger. He looked at her eyes that were misty from being wronged. Those lips that he had just ravaged. It was so sweet that it drove him crazy. He must have her. It would be best if he could make her pregnant with his child, so that she would never be able to leave him again. Back then, it was a mistake for him to hold back because of their blood relationship. She should have belonged to him. Now, he wanted to correct that mistake and have her completely. Gong Yimo's heart was ruthless. There was a dagger in her space. If Gong Che really did something, then don't blame her for not holding back. When Gong Che took off his crown and let down his black hair and stared at her in a daze, she suddenly felt as if the anger in her heart had been extinguished by ice water. He was smiling, but his eyes were filled with pain that was hard to ignore. Under her skirt, she was holding a dagger in her hand, but she didn't immediately make a move. Why did he have such a painful and conflicted gaze? Immerse. He slowly lowered his body and leaned closer to her. His expression was filled with a kind of careful satisfaction. To be able to hug her, he really felt very happy. All his pain was instantly cured. As long as he could have her, all those years of pain and suffering were nothing. Gong Yimo's heart ached because of his soft call. Gong Che let go. After all, they had loved each other deeply. She didn't want to see him in such pain. Gong Che blinked his beautiful eyes and revealed a soft smile. His gentleness was just like his past self, with a hint of shyness in his shyness. Immerse, as long as I can have you, I'm willing to die. As he spoke, he lowered his head and kissed Gong Yimo's face. Gong Yimo tightened her grip on the dagger. Did you know that Gong Dai also wanted to use this method to keep me, but in the end, he let go. This is where he is better than you. He will always respect my wishes. Gong Che's gentleness in that instant vanished into thin air. His face suddenly darkened as he viciously pinched her chin. Do you think that if you really want to leave him, he will still respect you? What a joke, because you gave him a chance. That's why he'll tolerate it. At this point, his eyes were bloodshot. But you. He never gave me a chance. Never. I don't want to be your brother. I don't want what you gave me. I want you. Only you. What are you doing? Gong Cheng's cold voice sounded. Gong Yimo quickly pushed Gong Che away. He also propped up his upper body and calmly looked at the emperor. Father, you're actually awake? He originally thought that the emperor's weak body would fall into a deep sleep after smelling the fragrance. He didn't expect that the emperor would wake up. You. The emperor clutched his chest and gasped for breath. God knows, when he woke up and saw his son pressing down on his daughter, he almost died suddenly. Changshi, where's Changshi? He closed his eyes and tried to calm himself down. Gong Yimo couldn't care so much anymore. She fiercely slashed Gong Che with the dagger. While he was in pain, she pushed him away and ran to the emperor's side. Father. She supported the emperor. Seeing him in pain, her eyes turned red. Gong Cheng was angry with her, but she was also the one who was coerced. It must be Gong Che who used some method to control her. Gong Che calmly wrapped his injured hand with his belt. Seeing the emperor in pain, he didn't think it was enough and slowly said, Changshi, I let him have a good rest. As for whether he can come back alive, it depends on whether father is obedient or not. You. Gong Cheng's eyes turned black. Fortunately, Gong Yimo supported him in time. She couldn't believe it and suddenly asked, What about Gong Dai? What did you do to Gong Dai? She thought that Gong Dai went to find the Medicine King, and Gong Che suddenly had so many poisons in his hands. She was afraid that the Medicine King fell into Gong Che's hands first, but with Gong Dai's skill, he should be fine. Why didn't he come back? Gong Che smiled slightly. Speaking of which, this younger brother of mine is really a headache for big brother, but it doesn't matter. He got up and put on his clothes one by one. That calm appearance was bewitching and beautiful, but there was also a kind of chilling danger. Immerse, you stay here with father first. Be good and go somewhere else. Wait for me to deal with those people, then I will come to pick you up and leave. With that, he strode out. Gong Yimo clearly saw that the entire Zhaoyang Hall was surrounded. She gritted her teeth and helped the emperor to the bed. Then, she looked at the incense burner that had burned out. She didn't know when the effect of the medicine would wear off. At this time, Gong Cheng's weak voice came from the bed. It's useless. Medicine King Li Xian's medicine has a strange effect. If it wasn't for him being too dangerous, I wouldn't have driven the descendants of the medical family out of the city. At that time, Gong Cheng wanted to secretly poison Gong Yimo to death and then kill Li Xian. But since Gong Yimo didn't die, this matter was considered over. In the end, the emperor didn't kill Li Xian. Today, Gong Yimo thought of this person and felt that his medical skills were not bad. Since the imperial doctors were helpless, there was nothing wrong with letting Li Xian try. But in the current situation, Li Xian had clearly fallen into Gong Che's hands. Then, would Gong Dai fall into Li Xian's trap when he was unprepared? Then, she shook her head. No, Gong Dai was more alert than her. He shouldn't be as careless as her. Moreover, Gong Che's strange movements must have been known by Gong Dai long ago. It's just that Gong Dai might not have thought that Gong Che would poison her. Wait, if she continued to stay here, what if Gong Che used her to threaten Gong Dai? She was right. Gong Che really used her to threaten Gong Dai. Seeing that not only was Gong Dai not poisoned, but he also gathered his subordinates to force his way into the palace. Until he was in front of him, Gong Che was still calm and said to him, You're really capable. So many people can't trap you. Where's royal sister? Gong Dai felt that he was too careless. He originally thought that even if Gong Che was crazy, it was impossible for him to do anything to the royal sister. This was because he knew Gong Che quite well. If he wasn't provoked, even if he hurt himself, he wouldn't hurt the royal sister. But what Gong Dai never expected was that Gong Che had been provoked. Moreover, it was a provocation that could drive people crazy. So when he went to Taiji Palace and didn't find the royal sister, and even Zhaoyang Palace was surrounded, he knew that Gong Che had gone crazy. He actually dared to lay his hands on the royal sister. Gong Che sat in the sedan, looking at Gong Dai and the others calmly. You want to see her? Sure. Gong Che requested with a smile. Kneel down first. I like it when you talk to me while kneeling. Chapter 522. Gong Yimo was burning with anxiety in Zhaoyang Palace Hall. She was thinking, could it be that she had to blast him out? No matter how she thought about it, she couldn't think of any suitable method. At this moment, the emperor muttered to himself, and Gong Yimo quickly grabbed his hand. Imperial father, do you feel better? The emperor looked at her and sighed. I'm afraid they're going to fight now. Gong Yimo frowned deeply. This was also what she was worried about. She knew Gong Dai's ability, but Gong Dai would take care of her. Gong Cheng closed his eyes and opened them again. After a while, he said in a low voice, Immerse, you understand. Only you can understand my painstaking efforts. As Gong Cheng said this, tears suddenly fell. He had never shed tears before. He had always been strong and imposing. But at this moment, large teardrops silently flowed out of his sunken eyes. His eyes were big, and because he was thin, his eyes were even bigger. Those layers of eyelids were blankly open, and his turbid eyes were moving, but the tears didn't stop. Gong Yimo's heart ached, and she suddenly knelt down beside his bed. "Imperial Father, I understand you. It's all my fault. Please, please don't cry." She said this, but her tears kept falling. She understood Gongcheng. His actions were all for the sake of Dayu State's country. He was afraid to see the country in chaos because of her, so he repeatedly intervened. But in the end, he didn't solve this matter. So much so that no one accepted his good intentions. Perhaps Gongcheng wasn't a good father, but in her memory, he had given her a lot of warmth and gave her the best. But now, because of her, his two sons with great power were fighting. If they weren't careful, they would be in danger of overturning the country. He had been diligent in politics all his life and loved the people, but in his old age, he had fallen into a dilemma. He couldn't let down the country, but he was also a father. He could give up his children for the country, but it didn't mean that it wouldn't hurt to give up his children. But what was more frightening was that when he saw the country in danger, he didn't have the power to stop it. That was why he cried. He cried for his own incompetence and for the pain of his children. However, his two sons didn't understand him and were still fighting with each other. The one who truly understood him was actually this daughter of his. Gong Yimo reached out to wipe his tears. Her eyes flashed with determination. "Father, don't worry. I'll make them stop." Emperor Gongcheng grabbed her hand and opened his mouth, but he couldn't speak for a long time. His face was sharp. Once, his voice was like a bell, his physique was like a mountain, and he laughed and scolded her father. She didn't know when he became the old emperor in front of her. Gong Yimo suddenly felt that she had done a lot of things, but also missed a lot. Therefore, she told the emperor firmly, "As long as I am alive, Dayu State will not fall into chaos. I, Gong Yimo, swear." He only wanted Golden Age. Don't let war break out. She had decided that she was going to use the bomb to stop this matter. If it didn't work, a cold light suddenly flashed in her eyes. If she couldn't do it, no matter how painful it was, she had no choice but to take that extreme path. At this time, Gongcheng finally stopped crying. He raised his hand with difficulty and pointed at a place. Gong Yimo curiously reached out and found a secret compartment. She knocked on it, and a small piece of parchment fell out. It seemed to be a broken map. "This is—" Gong Yimo opened her eyes and asked in puzzlement. There was a hairpin wrapped in the parchment. From the looks of it, it seemed to be very old. "This is your mother's," Gongcheng said with difficulty. "Now, I'll give it to you." Now that he had spoken a few sentences, he had to close his eyes and rest. He was already sick and had an old illness. Now that he had seen that terrifying scene, Clear Sun Hall was in danger, so he was extremely weak at this moment. "That is the Snow Clan's map. Your blood can make it appear." Gong Yimo asked in shock. "Father, didn't you not let me find the Snow Clan's treasure?" "Why?" Gongcheng slowly opened his eyes. He remembered that the Snow Concubine had said that he absolutely couldn't let Gong Yimo go to the Snow Clan's treasure. But there was another sentence. She said, the Snow Clan's treasure was Gong Yimo's treasure. She might die, or she might get an unpredictable power. Gongcheng was once afraid that Gong Yimo would be too strong and out of control. So even if he knew that there was a Snow Ganoderma in the treasure, he didn't want it. But ever since Gong Yimo said those words, she said that there would be a day for her. Dayu State would not be in chaos. This sentence touched him deeply, especially when his two sons were fighting with no regard for the consequences. So he decided to trust Gong Yimo this time. Not only did he let her go, he also gave her the map. Whether it was a blessing or a curse in the future, he didn't care. He just held Gong Yimo and made a vow. You really won't make the world chaotic. It was undeniable that Gong Yimo had the ability to make the world chaotic. As long as she had evil thoughts, the four countries would not be able to escape misfortune. She must always be kind, never have ambition, never have evil desires. Gong Yimo nodded. I swear. She had never been so serious. This seriousness was something that she had thought about for 3 days after waking up in this life. She had come to a sudden realization. She spoke slowly and piously. I swear, as long as Gong Yimo is alive, there will be no war in this world. I want peace in the 4 countries, prosperity and splendor. I will do my best, even if it means my life. Her words without hesitation made Gong Cheng's eyes finally shine. He struggled to show a smile. You, go to the bookshelf, the 3rd row. The 4th book. Gong Yimo went to the bookshelf. These were the books that Gong Cheng usually read before going to bed, so there weren't many books. Gong Yimo pulled out the 4th book from the 3rd row and found a rotating 8 trigrams pattern in the place where the book was placed. Gong Yimo looked back in surprise and saw Gong Cheng smiling. Take. Gong Dai away. Zhen, we'll wait for you to come back. What about you? Gong Yimo firmly believed that she would bring the snow Ganoderma back. Dai State still couldn't do without Gong Cheng. But now, leaving Gong Cheng here alone, she was worried that the crown prince would do something to him. Gong Cheng closed his eyes. It's fine. Gong Che won't harm Zhen. After all, he watched Gong Che grow up. No matter what, he wouldn't harm the emperor's life. Gong Yimo nodded and rotated the 8 trigrams pattern. The bookshelf turned and a passage appeared. She paused for a moment, then resolutely walked in. What entered her eyes was pitch black. At that moment, she sighed in her heart. Gong Dai, I'm sorry, I can't accept your retirement. Gong Dai looked at Gong Che without moving until Gong Che ordered someone to drag someone out. Changxi. Gong Che actually caught Changxi. Then Imperial Father, Royal Sister. Where's Royal Sister? Gong Dai clenched the narrow sword in his hand. Gong Che's move. Is he trying to force me to abdicate? Chapter 523. Immerse. She's naturally in this prince's hands. Gong Che smiles faintly. Immerse really doesn't guard against this prince. Of course, Li Xian's medicine is also very effective. Otherwise, this prince wouldn't have been able to catch her. Gong Dai's heart is heavy. Behind him, Lo Chi takes a step forward. Your Highness, the princess is exceptionally intelligent. She won't be caught by him. However, Gong Dai is very clear that the royal sister really doesn't guard against Gong Che. What do you want? Are you using the royal sister to threaten me? On one hand, he feels that the royal sister won't fall into Gong Che's hands. On the other hand, he's afraid that the royal sister is really in his hands. This conflicting feeling makes him hesitate to act rashly. The sword in his hand also starts to hesitate. He says coldly, that won't happen. Even if you catch the royal sister, you won't hurt her. Won't? Gong Che raises his eyebrows slightly. He raises his hand. The wound on it has already been bandaged. But she wants to hurt this prince. That wound was caused by the royal sister? What did you do to her? Gong Dai's hand gradually tightens, to the point that the blade trembles slightly. It's nothing much. Gong Che glances at Gong Dai. This prince lit a stick of Ruan Jinxiang for her in Imperial Father's room. This prince wanted to get closer to her. Despicable. In that instant, Gong Dai's murderous aura almost condenses. Gong Che doesn't seem to feel it, and he even says in a wrong tone, she hurt this prince first. As he speaks, a cold light flashes in his eyes. Tell me, this prince loves her deeply, but can't have her. Why can't I destroy her? In that instant, his entire person exudes a strange kind of enchantment. Gong Dai can't be sure whether this clearly crazy man will hurt the royal sister. Now, this prince wants you to kneel. He glared at Gong Dai and said coldly. Besieged on all sides, Gong Dai had brought more than 200 people here. Everyone was afraid of this Iron Blood army, but Gong Che wanted Gong Dai to kneel in front of everyone, breaking his pride. Gong Yimo ran out quickly. She found that the place she came out of was very close to the palace. It was right beside the moat. Obviously, This secret passage was built when the moat was being dug, in case of emergency. She was glad that she didn't use her body earlier. After all, her inner strength was gone and her limbs were weak. If Gong Che found out that she ran out, he would definitely order people to capture her and use her to threaten Gong Dai. But what she didn't know was that Gong Dai was still being threatened. There were so many Imperial guards in the palace, and Gong Dai's body was in Gong Yimo's hands. It wasn't wise for 200 people to go against 10,000 people, not to mention that the royal sister was still in his hands. He felt that Gong Che wouldn't bear to hurt the royal sister, but he couldn't take the risk. So he knelt down without hesitation. At that moment, Gong Che felt his whole body relax. He had never been so proud. Gong Dai, you also have a day like this, Gong Che said faintly. He looked at Gong Dai as if he was looking at a dead person. Let go of the royal sister. This is a fight between you and me. Gong Che laughed. If you want this prince to let her go, sure. He waved his hand and a dagger fell to the ground. Gong Dai recognized it. It was the dagger that the royal sister often used. As long as you cut off a finger. As long as you cut off a finger, this prince will let go of Immerse. Your Highness. Lo Chi and the others were all covered in blood, but they had a fearless aura. He wouldn't dare. The princess isn't the kind of person to be manipulated. Gong Che laughed again. That's right. This prince also wants to see if Immerse still likes you with a missing finger. Gong Dai picked up the dagger when he heard this. Gong Che had already gone crazy. What he didn't know was that when Gong Dai heard him say, "If you can't have her, then destroy her," his heart was already trembling. He was afraid and couldn't bear to see the royal sister get hurt. It was just a finger, so what if it was cut off? But at that moment, a loud explosion came from afar. Was that a bomb? Someone had lit a bomb by the Dragon City riverside. Gong Che's pupils shrank. How could it be? Gong Yimo had clearly been poisoned by Ruan Jinxiang. How could she have escaped from Zhaoyang Palace, which was surrounded by so many people? Gong Dai was still hesitant at first, but when he saw Gong Che's expression of disbelief, he finally smiled. His royal sister had always been able to escape death, not to mention a mere palace. But his worried heart was finally at ease. He stood up and threw the dagger at Gong Che. The dagger was like a dart. Many people wanted to rush forward to protect the emperor, but Gong Dai was too fast. The dagger ruthlessly left a scratch on Gong Che's arm. That was where Gong Yimo had injured him. Gong Dai. Gong Che gritted his teeth. He wished he could cut Gong Dai into 1,000 pieces. Gong Dai didn't want to accompany him anymore. He turned around, his robes fluttering. He glanced sideways at Gong Che as if he was looking at a dead man. This will be the last time. His lowered voice accurately reached Gong Che's ears. But there was a hint of relief. Relief that Royal Sister was fine. If there's a next time, regardless of whether Royal Sister agrees or not, I will kill you. If he dared to hurt Royal Sister again. After saying that, he led everyone to retreat. But how could Gong Che be willing to accept this? He had spent so much effort and done so many things. But in the end, Gong Dai was safe and sound. Immerse had also escaped. He couldn't accept this, so he ordered the Imperial army to chase after them. Although Gong Dai and the others were few in number, each of them was an elite. It was impossible to defeat the 10,000 Imperial army, but it wasn't difficult to leave this place. He wanted to see Royal Sister. He didn't want to be separated from her again. Every time they were separated, something would happen. He was so scared that his heart trembled every time. At that moment, Gong Dai even had an illusion that the whole world was filled with bad people. He could only hug Gong Yimo tightly so that she wouldn't be snatched away. The group of people killed along the way, especially Gong Dai, who was at the front. He was like a killing god. They didn't want to fight. They were like a black sword, breaking through the palace gates. Gong Yimo was waiting outside in fear. At this moment, she was standing in front of the palace gate near Longting River. The palace gate was tightly shut, and there wasn't a single guard in front of the gate. She didn't know if the gate would open in the next second and Gong Che's men or Gong Dai's men would come out to capture her. If it was the latter, it would be fine. If it was the former, she could only jump into Longting River. Time passed by minute. Gong Yimo seemed to hear the noise getting closer and closer. Slowly, the gate opened in front of her. At this moment, Gong Yimo's palms were sweaty as she waited for the first person to appear. The sun was a little dazzling. When the first person appeared and the light shone on him, it was as if he was glowing, causing her to squint her eyes slightly. The next second, she fell into the arms of a man covered in blood and trembled slightly. At that moment, Gong Yimo hugged him tightly. She didn't have time to see his face clearly. The smell on his body was also the pungent smell of blood. But she knew who he was. Gong Dai. I knew it. You will always arrive in time. Chapter 524. Gong Dai affectionately stroked her hair. Royal sister, are you all right? Gong Che, did he hurt you? Gong Dai wanted to ask, but he was afraid that if something really happened, he would hurt her. She only looked a little disheveled and didn't have any other injuries. I'm fine. Gong Yimo shook her head. Gong Che, he won't hurt me. He just temporarily lost his martial arts. What about you? Are you all right? Gong Dai wanted to say that he was fine, but Xiaoqi couldn't help but interrupt. Princess, the crown prince used you to threaten the prince. We thought. Luo Xiaoqi. Gong Dai was angry. If he said that, wouldn't it mean that he was in a passive position in front of his love rival? Gong Yimo chuckled, but the soldiers behind them had already caught up. Let's go. We'll talk after we get out of here. We won't make it in time. Gong Dai looked over her shoulder and saw that the imperial army was holding the line. Unless they jumped into the river, they wouldn't be able to kill their way out with only 200 people. Gong Yimo pondered for a moment and didn't act rashly. Gong Che sat in his palanquin, arriving calmly and unhurriedly. He saw that Gong Yimo's eyes were full of disapproval. Moer, I can't bear to hurt you, but even if I don't hurt you, you're still a headache. Gong Dai shielded Gong Yimo behind him. Now that he was sure that the royal sister was fine, he was relieved. That pair of black and white eyes fell coldly on Gong Che. Crown Prince, do you really think that you can keep us here? Gong Dai said softly, as long as I give the order, all the banks in the city will stop operating and all the money will disappear. Can you bear the consequences? At that time, the Dayu state would definitely fall into chaos. After all, the amount of money that the commoners had deposited in the banks was not small. If they were not careful, it would lead to the terrifying consequences of the instability of the imperial power. If he couldn't even keep his position as the crown prince, he probably wouldn't have the energy to find trouble with the royal sister. As expected, Gong Che's expression became serious. He suddenly smiled. You won't. His gaze fell on Gong Yimo. She won't allow you to do that. He knew Immerse too well. She would not allow internal strife in the Dayu state, and if she did not allow it, Gong Dai would definitely not do it. Gong Dai glanced at Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo said in a low voice, if that's the only way to leave, I'll agree. She smiled at Gong Che. After all, Dayu state is in chaos. Crown Prince Gij, you must have a way to solve it, right? However, he would definitely be in a terrible fix and would not be able to interfere in her affairs. Pain flashed across Gong Che's face. Immerse, you really know how to break my heart. Let us leave. The Crown Prince should understand that I have a bomb in my hands. If we force it, both sides will suffer. As Gong Dai spoke, he walked step by step towards Gong Che. He took out something that looked like a firework and twirled it at his fingertips. When that thing appeared, everyone thought that it was a signal. After all, if Gong Dai had a bomb in his hands, he wouldn't have had to fight his way out of the palace. Let my men leave first. I'll give it to you. A light flashed across Gong Che's eyes. Could it be that you think you can escape by yourself? Gong Dai smiled coldly. How would I know if I don't try? He walked to the front of Gong Che's carriage. With a wave of his hand, Gong Che's men went to take the thing in Gong Dai's hands. Gong Dai raised his hand and raised his eyebrows. Let them go. Gong Che narrowed his eyes and smiled, but gave the order. Take them down. The imperial guards around Gong Yimo heard the order and surrounded Gong Yimo and the others. At that moment, Gong Dai also moved. A murderous look flashed across his eyes. He suddenly lit up the fire scroll in his hand and threw it at Gong Che. If that's the case, you can go to hell. Not good. That's a bomb. Someone exclaimed when he heard Gong Dai's words. They hurried to protect the crown prince. Was Prince Chi going to assassinate the crown prince in front of everyone? Hearing this warning, everyone obediently lay down. Those who wanted to save the crown prince hesitated for a second. Only a few people actually rushed forward. After all, if that was a bomb, wouldn't they be smashed to pieces if they rushed forward now? It was this moment of hesitation that allowed Gong Dai to break through the heavy defense very easily. A few people wanted to stop him, but were all blocked by his sword. The difference in strength was reflected to the extreme at this moment. Only a bang sound was heard. It turned out that the crown prince's carriage had fallen to the ground. Those who were carrying the carriage were also afraid that it was a bomb, so at the last second, they had no choice but to abandon the carriage to save their lives. Gong Che was dizzy from the shock. At the same time, Gong Dai lightly tiptoed and landed lightly behind Gong Che. At that moment, Gong Che subconsciously grabbed the fire scroll that Gong Dai threw at him. He felt a chill run down his spine. Indeed, the moment it was lit, when he heard Gong Dai's words when the fuse was burning, he also thought that it was a bomb. Therefore, when he held it in his hand, his heart was also pounding. But in the next second, with a few screams, a black shadow easily broke through the defense. When a sword was placed against his neck, he realized that he had been tricked. After the fire scroll in his hand burned, there was no sign of life. He turned it over and found that the fire scroll had been dug out with fingers. So after the fuse was burned, nothing would happen. Gong Che angrily threw the empty shell to the ground. Those who were protecting him were ashamed. Because of this hesitation, not many people rushed forward to protect the crown prince. They could not stop Prince Chi, and the crown prince fell into Prince Chi's hands. Gong Dai, if you dare to touch me, you will not leave here alive. Gong Dai's black robes and Gong Che's bright yellow crown prince court robes were a stark contrast. On the black robes, there were dragons bearing their fangs and brandishing their claws. On the bright yellow robes, there were 5 golden dragons that shone with golden light. At this moment, when he heard Gong Che's words, Gong Dai's black hair fluttered. His lips curled into a deep smile. I believe that with the crown prince leading the way, I will be able to leave smoothly. Now, he looked in Gong Yimo's direction. Let my men leave. Your Highness. Lo Chi also knew that if he did not leave now, he would not be of any help. So he swallowed his words and waited for the crown prince to leave. Gong Che was unwilling to let go, but he felt a pain in his neck and blood flowed out. Gong Dai really dared to do this. Your Highness. Mu Yu was Gong Che's trusted aide. She was anxious. Prince Chi, offending your superior is a capital offense. Gong Dai did not care. Without the royal sister as a threat, what could Gong Che do to him? So he only chuckled. So what if the crown prince is dead? What imperial father lacks the least his sons? What do you think? The crown prince? Gong Ju lowered his head slightly. At this time, the sedan was on the ground, and he stood behind Gong Che. When they spoke, they looked like a pair of good brothers. However, the older brother's expression was dignified, and because of his words, his expression became even more distorted. Chapter 525. Everyone present was shocked by this sudden turn of events. They were at a loss as to what to do. They felt as if there was a fire burning in the air and water surging violently. The blade slowly slit Gong Che's neck. Gong Che's face turned pale, but he did not make a sound. Gong Yimo also did not speak. She knew that Gong Dai knew what he was doing. However, the people at the side could not bear it any longer. Prince Chi, let's talk nicely. Put down the sword. Gong Dai's cold eyes swept over them. At that moment, they felt as if a blade had just brushed past their faces. I said, want my person to leave. His white hand gripped the sword tightly, and the tip of the sword stained the crown prince's robe red. It was a shocking sight, and it made the people guarding the crown prince tremble with fear. Good, good, good. We'll let him go. Muyu was assigned to Gongche by the emperor. He had followed the crown prince for many years, and protecting the crown prince was his most important task. However, Gong Dai's personality was ruthless, and he dared to kill his way out of the palace. Who knew what he would do next? No. Gong Che suddenly closed his eyes and said angrily, "Let him kill me. I want to see how he will kill me in front of Immerse." You think I don't dare? Gong Dai narrowed his eyes. The layers of murderous intent caused the people who heard him to have goosebumps. He had really endured for too long. When he killed his way out of the palace, he did not deliberately kill anyone. He even showed mercy. His hands had not been stained with blood for a long time. He had obtained the royal sister, so he felt that he could endure anything. However, Gongche really knew how to provoke people. Not only did he covet his possessions, but he also provoked the anger buried deep in his heart time and time again. Under Gong Yimo's gaze, Gong Dai's hand holding the sword was very tight. It trembled slightly, as if he had endured to the extreme. Gong Dai, Gong Yimo shouted in a low voice and frowned deeply. Gong Dai acted as if he didn't hear anything, but in the end, he still took a deep breath and calmed his eyes. There were a few times when he wanted to directly cut down. After all, now that he had money and power, he naturally had power. Therefore, he didn't have to endure. There was no one in this world that he didn't dare to kill. The only problem was that he couldn't bring himself to do it. The royal sister valued the crown prince a lot, so he could avenge today's humiliation in the future. Therefore, he exerted a little force in his hand. Release. Gong Che gritted his teeth and didn't make a sound, but more and more blood flowed out. Finally, Muyu steeled her heart and waved her hand. All of you, stand down. How dare you? The imperial guards looked at each other. They surrounded Gong Yimo. They wanted to hear Muyu move aside, but they also wanted to hear His Highness stay. Chapter 526. Her unconditional love for Gong Che had been completely extinguished by the flames of war. Because she was used to seeing people separated by life and death, she was used to seeing love and hate. Only then did she realize that in the face of the country's righteousness, those were as light as a feather, not worth mentioning. When the nest is overturned, how can there be an unbroken egg? In the end, those feelings of love were like an illusory dream in the flames of war. They could not be compared to the guilt in her heart that was growing heavier and heavier, as well as the responsibility for this land that was affected by the flames of war. If you want an explanation, I will give you one when I return. Now, let us go. Gong Che's hands clenched into fists. When Gong Dai heard Gong Yimo's words, the crazy killing intent in his heart gradually calmed down. Yes, he loved such a woman. A strange woman who was tolerant of righteousness in her heart. Therefore, his hands could not be stained with blood. He could not cause her to be afraid because of his momentary anger. If you are still a man, you should not make things difficult for her. Just like today, the situation where everyone was in a state of panic was not something that royal sister wanted to see. Gong Che's heart was instantly filled with anger because of his words. How could he not know his responsibility? How could he not know the heavy burden? He just could not control himself. He also wanted to be as free and easy as Gong Dai. He also wanted to do whatever he wanted and have absolute freedom, but he couldn't. What he had done today had thrown the entire court into chaos. You can go. Finally, Gong Che slowly let go of his hand. His voice was so soft that it was almost inaudible. Gong Yimo said, "Give me a boat." Muyu glanced at Gong Che. Seeing that he did not speak, she immediately ordered someone to prepare a small boat. Gong Yimo then glared at the imperial guards behind her. Move aside. Those people looked at the silent crown prince and moved aside. Then, Gong Yimo said to Lo Chi and the others. You all go first. What about you? Lo Chi quickly asked. Gong Yimo took a deep breath. I'll go with Gong Dai. Lo Chi knew that the princess was the kind of person who kept her word, so he didn't try to persuade her and left with her people. When Gong Yimo saw them leave, she stepped onto the small boat. Gong Dai looked at the royal sister with a wronged expression. He felt a little regretful. If only the royal sister had left first. Although he had given up on killing Gong Che, he still wanted to give him a little punishment. Gong Yimo seemed to have seen through Gong Dai's thoughts. She lamented in her heart. Just now, Gong Dai wanted to kill Gong Che. If she hadn't stopped him in time, he would definitely have done it. Seriously, both of them are so troublesome. Therefore, rather than talking about Gong Che, wasn't she also educating Gong Dai? His evil tendencies were too strong. Even after so many years of practice, he didn't become more like her. Gong Dai knew that his actions just now had made the royal sister a little worried about him. He sighed in his heart. Suddenly, he lifted Gong Che and flew up, landing beside the soaring dragon river. Everyone immediately glared, afraid that Prince Chi would attack the crown prince. After all, if the princess hadn't stopped Prince Chi in time, the crown prince would have been beheaded. At this moment, Gong Che was being held hostage. At this point, he also knew that he had lost. But he still couldn't accept it. Gong Dai, if you hadn't made a feint, how could we have taken advantage of this opportunity? How despicable. Gong Dai slowly retreated while holding him hostage. Hearing this, he raised his eyebrows slightly. His eyes were smiling as he looked at the imperial guards who were closing in. With a flip of his other hand, a small jade slip appeared. That jade slip caused Gong Che's pupils to shrink. When he had caught the fire tube that Gong Dai had thrown, he had discovered that the contents of the fire tube had been dug out with a finger. He had thought that Gong Dai had deliberately prepared this, but now he knew that Gong Dai had intentionally spared his life because he didn't want to kill him. This knowledge made him feel humiliated. He didn't need the sympathy of his love rival. If he had the guts, he could directly blow him up in front of Immerse. When they retreated to the riverside, Gong Che was still in a daze. Gong Yimo looked at him and sighed slightly. Then she took his hand and handed him something. Gong Che lowered his head to look at it. Only then did he completely understand why he had lost. What Gong Yimo had given him was a gold medal that said, "As if I am here in person." In the palace, everyone was his men. But outside the palace, the imperial guards who had been mobilized were under his command, and they were under the command of the emperor. In other words, as long as Gong Yimo was willing, she could have directly taken these people and escaped, or let these people attack him. But she didn't do so because she wanted to give her brother, the crown prince, one last shred of face, even if he had forced her to the riverside of Dragon City. She would rather let the world think that she had forced him with her life, begging him to be soft-hearted and let her leave. She also didn't want the world to see that a princess like her had more power than the crown prince, that she could play the crown prince in the palm of her hand and leave calmly. In this mess, he had lost his composure right from the start. Moreover, he had lost to a woman. If Gong Dai had shown him the jade slip to make him feel humiliated, then Gong Yimo had given him the jade slip to give him the last shred of respect. His imperial father was right. His heart was not as broad and benevolent as Immerse. All of this was because he, the crown prince, had not done well. Gong Yimo frowned slightly and sighed. She placed the gold medal in his palm and said solemnly, "Brother Crown Prince, I can't accept your sudden change in temperament. You may have been provoked by something. We can talk about this when you have calmed down. But now, Imperial Father's matter cannot be delayed. You also have to bear the responsibility. I hope you understand what you should do. Don't let down those who you shouldn't, okay?" Gong Che looked at her in a daze. "What about you? Are you going to leave me again?" Gong Yimo retracted her hand. "This Dai state can do without me, but it can't do without you. I'm leaving. I have to find medicine for Imperial Father. Brother Crown Prince, take care." Gong Dai gently put away his sword and jumped onto the boat. The water separated Gong Dai, Gong Yimo, and Gong Che into two different worlds. Royal sister has me. Crown Prince, you don't have to send me off. In order to cooperate with Gong Yimo, Gong Dai might as well be magnanimous. He wiped the blood off his face and downplayed the huge pursuit as sending her off. Gong Che secretly felt hateful. Gong Dai was really sinister. He was the kind of person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. But in front of Immerse, he pretended to be magnanimous. He had clearly taken advantage of her, but he still maintained his demeanor. It was really hateful. At this moment, Gong Dai secretly exerted force under his feet and the boat moved. Gong Dai stood at the bow of the boat. The wind blew his robes. His black robes fluttered in the wind, making him look like an immortal. He turned around, but at this moment, he looked back. At this moment, there was no hostility on his body. There was only indifference and ridicule. You will never be able to win against me. He said these words silently. Gong Che saw it and felt hatred in his heart. Your Highness, are we still chasing? Muyu asked softly. Gong Che's face was tense. He gradually woke up from this madness. No, she will come back. Chapter 527. On the boat, Gong Yimo suddenly burst into laughter. She didn't know why, but when she saw that Gong Dai had clearly escaped unscathed, but still turned around to provoke Gong Che, that kind of childishness was filled with a strong sense of unwillingness. It was as if she was dissatisfied that she was pulled away before she could take revenge. Thinking about it carefully, he was only 17. When Gong Yimo laughed, Gong Dai was a little embarrassed. He didn't want to do that. He was really careless. He could have secretly taken revenge. For example, adding fuel to the fire in Beijing so that Gong Che would have to spend more effort to clean up the mess. He shouldn't have shown his bitterness in front of royal sister. What Gong Yimo didn't know was that when she was with Gong Dai, every time Gong Dai cared about her, he wouldn't easily kill people on the surface or use forceful methods. However, he quickly learned what it meant to save the country through indirect means. If he couldn't do it on the surface, he would do it secretly. However, Gong Yimo didn't feel disgusted by this kind of vile behavior. She didn't even feel that he was ruthless. Instead, she felt that he was a little cute. Was she poisoned by a poison called Gong Dai? The more she thought about it, the more helpless she felt. After feeling helpless, a sweet feeling filled her chest. This boat swayed, just like her heart, swaying. Gong Dai walked to her side and sat down. This boat was really too small. When he moved, the boat moved with him. He was so scared that he quickly lightened his movements. Royal sister, are you all right with the poison? Gong Yimo felt for a moment. I feel that I'm slowly regaining some strength. I should be fine in a while. After all, Gong Che wouldn't really hurt her. She still firmly believed that. At this time, the autumn sun was hanging high in the sky. Gong Yimo touched her stomach and took out some snacks and fruits from her space. She said a little embarrassedly, I only brought some daily snacks. You'll have to make do with them. They hadn't had lunch yet. Gong Dai's hand was stuffed with a piece of sweet milk cake that he hated the most, but was royal sister's favorite. She was always like this. Whenever she had something good, she would always want to share it with him. The first thing she would give was to him. Gong Dai sighed. In fact, he was so happy that he felt as if he had eaten honey. He took a bite and ate it without hesitation. Gong Yimo flipped through the desserts and found that out of all the pastries, there was only one piece of milk cake left. Furthermore, she had given it to Gong Dai immediately. She glanced at Gong Dai and then at the cake in his hand. She leaned over and asked in a serious manner, what does this taste? I don't think I've eaten it before. Why does this snack look so much like milk cake? Gong Dai almost laughed himself to death when he heard that. That fair little face of hers had a faint blush. The first feeling she gave when she showed her face was not only breathtaking, but also comfortable. It made people feel comfortable. Gong Dai was stunned. Just when they were in the thick of it, he heard Gong Yimo call him so softly. Husband. She clearly saw Gong Dai's Adam's apple moving nonstop, as if he was enduring something. When that fair skin was excited, it actually had a faint pink color, just like hers. It was simply too delicious. So she lowered her head and nibbled on his Adam's apple. Mm. Gong Dai suddenly let out an unbearable sound, making the two of them tremble, but he quickly shut his mouth in annoyance. He was actually stimulated by this coquettish little vixen. He had to teach her a good lesson. Husband, husband, husband. She blinked her eyes like a vixen, seducing his soul. That soft voice seemed to have a hook. It kept drilling into his brain, making him lose his mind. Gong Dai felt that he couldn't take it anymore, so he directly stuffed a piece of the snack Gong Yimo took out into her mouth. Gong Yimo saw that he seemed to be a little flustered. After swallowing a few mouthfuls, she began to tease him again. Husband. That voice repeated 1,000 times. Why won't you look at me? It turned out that Gong Dai had averted his gaze, glancing left and right, refusing to look at her. Even from so far away, she could hear Gong Dai's heart thumping. This extremely handsome man was unbelievably pure in some aspects. I'm afraid that I won't be able to hold it in. Then don't hold it in. Gong Yimo smiled maliciously. She wanted to see why Gong Dai's self-control was so good. Gong Dai glanced at her with watery eyes, as if he was wronged. He helplessly stroked her long hair. Because I want to give you the most perfect wedding. I want to save the best for that night, my baby. Chapter 528. When Gong Che returned to the palace, there was already a large group of people waiting for him. The hundreds of officials did not know what had happened and were waiting on both sides in fear. Before they could open their mouths, they saw Gong Dai quickly pass by. His expression was cold as he ruthlessly tore off the cloth that was tied around the wound and threw it on the ground. Without even looking at them, he went to Zhaoyang Hall. The cloth that was wrapped around the wound was covered in blood, causing the officials on both sides of Zhaoyang Hall to look at each other in dismay. They were even more alarmed. Could it be that Prince Qi wanted to fight for the throne? Otherwise, who would dare to hurt the crown prince? When the imperial guards around Zhaoyang Hall saw that the crown prince had returned, they separated into two sides. Someone quickly opened the door and let Gong Che in. At this time, Gong Cheng was already neatly dressed. He was wearing a dragon robe as he sat by the desk. The majesty that had been cultivated for decades made people know that he was the emperor and a dignified and wise ruler. However, at this moment, the wise ruler was in his twilight years. His emaciated cheeks and sunken eyes exuded a sense of powerlessness. He had originally been resting with his eyes closed, but when he heard the sound, he opened them and glanced at Gong Che. He didn't get angry and only spoke softly. You're back. The wound on Gong Che's arm was still bleeding. Imperial father. Why? Gong Che could not understand and his face was filled with anger. Why are you so biased? Every time, you stand on Gong Dai's side. Is it because he is a prince? Is it because he said that he will never be the emperor? Gong Cheng pondered for a moment. After a few hours of relaxation, he was much better. When he saw the scene of Gong Che pressing down a mower, he was almost angered to death. But at this moment, when he saw Gong Che return alone, he was suddenly not angry. Because no matter what excessive things Gong Che had done, must have taught him a lesson. Am I biased? Emperor Gong Cheng chuckled softly. We thought we had already done everything we could for you. We gave you the best education, the highest status, purged the imperial court for you, and did not suspect you. You will easily become the emperor. Isn't that good? Gong Che asked with a sneer. Why didn't you pursue the matter of Gong Dai's possession? You were so angry that you fell ill. Why didn't you pursue the matter when he came back? If he also had a bomb in his hands, why would Gong Dai be so arrogant? Gong Cheng sneered. I originally wanted to pursue the matter. Gong Dai has no sense of patriotism, and the country is too unstable in his hands. But when I saw a mower, I didn't say anything. Do you know why? Why? Gong Che expressed his dissatisfaction with his eyes. Gong Cheng couldn't help but laugh. His son was sometimes very calm, but sometimes too impetuous. Haven't you noticed? Gong Chung smiled mysteriously. Immerse's arm has the chastity mark. His words left Gong Che in a daze for a long time. Chastity mark. That means Immerse, and Gong Dai didn't. At this moment, he couldn't tell if he was more glad or annoyed. Glad that she hasn't reached that stage with Gong Dai yet. Annoyed that his actions today must have made her disgusted. Emperor Gong sighed. As soon as Immerse came back, I realized that we had misjudged Gong Ju. I thought that he was a person who would never give up once he set his sights on a woman. But when it comes to Immerse, he tolerates it again and again. Yuchi was such a good opportunity, but he was able to endure it. Since he can even endure this, what else can he not endure? In his hands, it might be safer than in your hands. Gong Che was originally full of doubts, but when he heard Gong Cheng's words, he was unwilling. If the bomb is in my hands, it's also safe. Gong Chung sneered. Your actions during this period of time are like a different person, completely disregarding the consequences. I don't care what kind of stimulation you received outside, but before you do anything, you have to consider your identity as the crown prince. But have you considered it? He shook his head in disappointment. Gong Dai has the bomb in his hands, but he didn't hurt you. With his personality, he even let you come back in one piece. If you had the bomb in your hands today, would you let Gong Dai go? Would you? Gong Che was stunned by the Emperor's series of questions. If it was him, would he let Gong Dai go? Gong Chung concluded, I didn't pursue this matter because Gong Dai is a sharp sword, but now he has a scabbard. Immerse is his scabbard, but Immerse is a demon to you. Do you understand what it means to be the crown prince, and what it means to be responsible? This is your innate destiny. No matter how unwilling you are, no matter how much you hate it, this is your destiny, a destiny you can't resist. Gong Che's face turned pale, because Imperial Father said the same thing as Immerse. At this time, he suddenly asked softly, Is Immerse really not your child? Gong Cheng's eyebrows twitched. So this is the reason why you suddenly went crazy? Who told you, Empress? He immediately thought of the only possibility. Gong Che coldly said, This son accidentally heard it. His cold eyes stared at Gong Chung. So, Immerse really isn't your biological daughter. Gong Chung was silent for a moment, then suddenly swept everything on the desk to the ground. Don't be delusional. As long as I acknowledge her, she will be your sister. It has nothing to do with blood relations. This is also fate. Gong Che pursed his lips under his exhausted roar. If this is fate, then why can Gong Dai do it? Gong Che suddenly looked at his hand. Because I'm the crown prince, so I can't do anything. Because Gong Dai is a prince, he can do whatever he wants. It turns out that being the crown prince is actually so tiring. So tiring. If this is fate, can I give up this fate? Gong Che asked seriously. Gong Chung couldn't answer. He just kept gasping for breath. Because of anger. Then wait until I'm dead. On the other side, Gong Dai hugged her and asked, Royal sister, you want to find the Snow Ganoderma? In other words, you want to find the Snow Clan's treasure. With that, he fished out a small piece of map from his chest. I got this map by chance. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up. She quickly took the map from his hand and said excitedly, I also have a piece. Imperial Father gave it to me. Imperial Father said that only by dripping blood on it, it will show the map. I don't know how it works, but I want to try it. With that, under Gong Dai's somewhat puzzled gaze, she pricked her finger and painfully dripped a drop of blood on it. A strange thing happened. The parchment absorbed the blood and showed a corner of the vein. Gong Yimo exclaimed that it was magical. It can really show the terrain when it touches blood. What a strange parchment. At this time, Gong Dai looked at the person in his embrace. He also bit his finger and dripped a drop of blood on the parchment. But the blood didn't melt. In a flash of light, Gong Yimo's smile froze on her face. In her ears, she heard Gong Dai's faint sigh. Not everyone's blood can do it, my royal sister. In this life, although his character was much better, his nature was still there. However, for her, he endured it time and time again. He wanted to possess her, but he let her leave again and again. He wanted to kill and take revenge, but he didn't care about the consequences. However, for her, he chose to keep a low profile and be cold. For you, he was willing to suppress his nature and control his desires. For you, he kept his claws in front of the world and carefully wanted to give you the best. How could such a man not be moved? Of course, even if he had kept his claws, there were still many people who were afraid of him. Gong Yimo giggled. You really did it. You became everything I like. I don't like killing and I don't like being domineering. You helped me and gave me enough space. It's you who forced me step by step and gave in step by step. It made me feel that missing you would be the biggest regret in my life. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.